Stream is fired up across the internet. If you're not familiar with the program, we do multi-stream, which means we broadcast across a number of different platforms, places like Facebook and YouTube and Periscope. We just like to make sure that they're alive and well before we get moving. And it looks like we're almost there. All right, my friends. Okay, we're live. Hello and welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gruler. I am a criminal defense attorney over here at the R&R Law Group in the always beautiful, sunny Scottsdale, Arizona, where my team and I over the course of many years have helped represent thousands of good people facing criminal charges navigate the criminal justice system. Unfortunately, sometimes in life we all run into bumps in the road, and one of the things that we like to do here is help people through that. Now, over our time in practice, we have seen a lot of problems with our justice system. I'm talking about misconduct involving the police. We have prosecutors behaving poorly. We have judges not particularly interested in a thing called justice. And it all starts with the politicians, the people at the top, the ones who write the rules and pass the laws that they expect you and I to follow, but sometimes they have a little bit of difficulty doing so themselves. And so that's why we started this program called Watching the Watchers, so that together we can shine that big, beautiful spotlight of accountability and transparency back down upon that very system, which is why we're so grateful that you are here and with us today. We have been away for a while. We're back after a long holiday break. You can call it an explosive break. We're going to get into some of the Nashville bombing today. We've got a lot of information about that. There was an explosion that took place over the weekend, literally on Christmas Day. And a lot of people missed it. Kind of one of those things that you're home with your family, you're focused on the more important things. And so we want to just do a quick recap. What is really going on here? What happened? They say that they know the individual who did it. They have all of the evidence that they need, and they're going to kind of wrap that up. But we want to break it down and show you what happened there. We've got some video footage, a couple of different angles from the explosion itself. We also have a number of photographs, and then we've got some statements from some of the law enforcement officials who were responsible for investigating that crime. We want to dive into that. We're also going to spend a little bit of time today talking about the Trump signing of the COVID bill, which we had a lot of criticisms about last week. Donald Trump signed the bill late last night on Sunday night, and so we want to talk about that. The White House released a statement, and the Democrats are pretty happy about it. So want to talk about that. And then lastly, we're going to finish up with a new election lawsuit. This one from a guy named Louie Gohmert. He's a representative over from the state of Texas. And so we want to talk a little bit about what that lawsuit looks like, because it's going after Mike Pence, suing the vice president. That's a little bit interesting. Haven't seen that yet. We've covered a lot of election litigation, but we want to spend some time dissecting that lawsuit. We have the actual complaint that was filed out of the Federal District Court of Texas. So let's get going. Before we dive into it, I do want to invite you, if you're not a regular of the program, we go live at this time every day of the week. We're going to be grinding through into 2021. We're going to go all the way through this week. We want you to be a part of it. So now's a good time to invite you to subscribe. Hit that subscribe button. Give us a thumbs up. Leave a nice comment. It does help our channel sort of escape that YouTube bubble that they have us entrapped in, because we talk a lot about the election. The way the program works, if you're not familiar with it, I'm going to go through a slide, a little bit of a presentation. Those slides are going to be available in our Discord server, which is a place where we chat before and after the program. We're going to put a copy of the slides. Miss Faith is right back there. She's going to copy of those and add those in the Discord, so you can get a copy of those and get a copy of my free book as well. The PDF is in there. Other than that, my friends, let's get into it. So as we talked about, the big story over the weekend, over the long holiday break, was this Nashville bombing. This story comes from CNN. We see here, investigators are looking at any and all possible motives after identifying the Nashville bomber. So many people were sort of waking up on Christmas morning and running out to greet their families with their presents and to witness some of the evidence of Santa Claus leaving your residence. We want to acknowledge all the hard work that Santa did, bringing us a lot of joy. When they turned on the news or when they checked their Twitter feed, they were noticing that there was a big explosion that took place in Nashville. So they spent some time on Christmas Day sort of dissecting it. We saw that there was a lot of, I would say, tangential law enforcement responses from around the state of Tennessee. They had a lot of 911 calls that were being dropped. They had some communication errors that were happening throughout the state because the explosion took place right outside of an AT&T facility. And then there was also the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, grounded all of the flights over Nashville. So it's kind of a big deal. And many people were wondering what the heck happened. So we're going to try to piece some of that together. Once again, this article comes over from CNN. It says investigators are looking at any and all possible motives after identifying the Nashville bomber. CNN says investigators are looking for any information about this guy named Anthony Quinn Warner. So this is the individual who they suspect. We'll do a little bit of a backdrop on the story, and then we'll dive into some of the photographs and the video recordings. It says here that he was described as a 63-year-old loner, died when his recreational vehicle exploded early Christmas morning on the 2nd Avenue north of the city's downtown district. The blast injured at least 8 people and damaged more than 40 buildings, including an AT&T transmission facility that provides wireless service to much of the region. On Monday afternoon, the avenue was littered with rubble and remained largely off limits, even to local business owners. One building had partially collapsed and several emergency alarms continued to blare the dust-filled air. So I want to show you some of the video footage before I do. Before the explosion, very interesting here, the RV, which is where this was all housed. So what happened is we're going to see there's an RV, a big sort of camper that pulled up, and it issued this really ominous warning, and it was sort of parked outside on the street that I'm about to show you, and it was blaring off this message that was warning people to evacuate. I have a video clip of it. Very ominous, very, very eerie sounding, and this was going on for some period of time. I did not get a clip of this, but apparently the RV was also broadcasting Petula Clark's 1964 hit Downtown, a song about how the bustle of downtown can cure a lonely person's troubles. And I remember that song from, what was that movie with the robot? There was a robot who was driving around, and they were playing that song a lot. And I thought that was kind of, spooky and ominous and eerie, but also kind of funny. It says, upon the warnings, officers went from door to door evacuating residents, likely saving many from serious injury. The RV exploded at 6:30 a.m. on Christmas morning, just moments after one officer left the immediate area. And Officer Amanda Topping, who was there, says, I just saw the biggest flames I've ever seen, the biggest explosions. I just saw orange and felt the heat, the wave. I want to show you what that looks like here. So this is an image of Nashville, the street where the explosion took place. And when we see over here, it looks like we can identify the actual RV right here. If you are listening on audio only, of course, you cannot see my screen, but we're looking at an empty street along with an RV parked right there. This is an officer who's sort of walking at the corner, and the rest of the street looks pretty empty. Most of the cars are cleared. Now, I want you to point out, take a look at this street, right? This looks like a nice downtown area, sort of like a gas lamp district area, and not a lot of activity, presumably because everybody has been cleared out. But it's also, it's a nice area, right? We're going to see what this explosion did here shortly. But first, let's take a look at this. There's no audio in this clip, but this is an officer walking away literally right in the split second of time, okay? So the officer turns around and he's walking away. You can see police vehicles parked at the other side of the street, and then boom, there it is. So the CCTV camera captures the whole thing. I mean, it looks like a massive explosion. It was literally knocking over traffic cones and traffic pillars and little, traffic roadblocks many, many hundreds of feet away. And, the police vehicle on the other end is still sort of sitting there. There's, a big explosion, and that officer who was there just missed it. Let's take a look at another angle. This one also, I think, has a little bit of sound. Yeah, so let's listen here, because what you can hear, so this is where you're hearing that slight sound of let's evacuate. You need to evacuate immediately. I'm going to play you a sort of a higher volume version of that when we get there, but watch this. It's sort of a fisheye lens, and you hear some of that recording in the background, and then the explosion takes place, what looks like coming off of the right side of the screen. So this may have been the other angle on the other side of the street. It's hard to tell, but the explosion is going to come from the right side of your screen. So sort of keep an eye over there, and then listen a little bit as we have some of the recording that you can hear. So a lot of static. We have some video footage there. or some audio of police vehicles in the area. And the message, it was saying, if you can hear this message, evacuate now. If you can hear this message, evacuate now. So a bit troubling. We have one more angle. This one is from inside of a building, and we're going to see the explosion sort of rip through the outside of the building and then break its way in. You know, a lot, fortunately nobody was killed here other than allegedly the bomber himself, who we're going to talk about. But that was the only casualty. It looks like 8 other people were injured, and I haven't seen anything that suspects that anybody who was hurt is not going to survive. So, our thoughts and prayers with anybody who was injured in this. But a lot of the business owners now, their businesses have been totally demolished. We're going to show you some of the footage, some of the wreckage, the aftermath of the explosion itself. But keep that in mind that, there are probably dozens of businesses who are basically having to rebuild from scratch. Here is the final video from inside one of these. Oh, there it is. Let's play that one more time. All right, so looking from the inside, there we go, explosion. And then when we wait a little bit, we're going to wait for some of the dust to clear. This looks like it was, I guess we missed that one. But when you wait for some of the dust to clear, it looks like that there's a bunch of debris outside, just sort of scattered around and strewn everywhere. Here is a photograph from the aftermath of the explosion itself. So we can see, just total devastation. And I want to point out a couple things, right? This is, these are multiple vehicles that we see that are just charred beyond any recognition. Trees have been knocked over. No remnants at all of the camper, that SUV that he was driving through this vicinity. So nothing there. Now, they're going to talk about DNA evidence here shortly. They're going to explain that they got this guy's evidence from this explosion site, which to me is, a very impressive feat given what we're looking at here. A lot of this is just totally demolished. Apparently they were able to find some sort of trace DNA evidence. We see that the ATF was there, and the carnage is pretty bad. These buildings are just totally demolished. Don't see much other than debris from the building. Don't see much vehicle debris or anything like that. So we'll see what they are able to come up with. Let's take a look at some of the officers who helped to clear the area. We talk a lot about bad Popo on this show, about officers doing things poorly, misconduct. These officers were heroes of the afternoon, of the morning actually. So we have right here Officer Amanda Topping, we have Brenna Hosley, we've got James Wells, we've got Officer Michael Sipos, Tyler Lulin, and we have Timothy Miller, who are all officers who were, when that vehicle was parked, they were going around and clearing the area. The message obviously said, if you can hear this message, evacuate now. It was also playing the song Downtown, and these officers were clearing the streets. So, major hat tip to those men and women who helped to clear the area. When officers are heroes, we want to call them heroes, and they certainly did their job and did it well, did it quickly, and presumably saved a lot of lives. So hats off to those guys and that woman there, 2 women who were helpful in clearing the area. Now, I wanted to play a little bit more of that sound clip that we heard that was saying, evacuate now. If you can hear this message, evacuate now. This comes from Betsy Williams. She's a Nashville explosions eyewitness. So she was there at the scene, and she heard some of this message. Here is what she had to say about it. And then this video is going to show a lot of the other aftermath, a lot of the carnage. And I want you to pay close attention to it, because we're going to hear from 3 different individuals. I think I clipped all 3 today, and they're all saying that they've got DNA evidence of this bomber, the perpetrator, somebody who was responsible for this. They were able to get that done pretty quick. Remember, this happened on the 25th. Yesterday was the 27th, and by the 27th, they had his identity. They knew exactly who he was. And when we hear from some of the law enforcement officials, they're going to say that this is a case closed. They already swept up his DNA, confirmed it was him, no other eyewitnesses. And so, ask ourselves, is this thing cut and dry? Is it open and closed case? We'll see. So here's Betsy Williams giving us a recount. Then you're going to see some video footage, some aftermath of the explosion. Let's dig in.
Window, and there was this white RV that was parked just across the street. And so it started playing this message.
Officers immediately began knocking on doors and evacuating residents here, not knowing if the bomb was going to detonate immediately.
Officials said 3 people were injured, but not critically, which is very good news. But look at that. Blast damage, dozens of buildings in the area. Cars just totally shredded, burnt everywhere to a crisp. Multiple cars. Police found tissue near the blast site that they believe could be human remains. That came from the Metro Nashville Police Department. And then investigators believe that the blast was likely the result of a suicide bombing, two law enforcement officials told CNN. So FBI, ATF are assisting the Nashville police in the investigation. And it's pretty bad, right? Pretty big explosions. It's kind of a miracle that nobody was killed in that. But fortunately, the officers acted quickly, cleared the area. Now we are hearing from multiple law enforcement officials. So this guy is with the U.S. Attorney General's office. Going to give you his name here shortly. Then we're going to hear from the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, so TBI, and then we're going to hear from the FBI. All three of these individuals are hinting or indicating that they have some DNA confirmation, that they know who this guy was. They were able to wrap this case up pretty quickly. So let's listen in.
Thanks, Jason, and thanks for being here. On behalf of the investigative team, I wanted to give you a major update in a development that we've come to in this case, and that is, based on the evidence that we've gathered to this point, we've come to the conclusion that an individual named Anthony Warner is the bomber, that he was present when the bomb went off, and that he perished in the bombing. We base this conclusion on forensic evidence, including DNA evidence that you'll hear about, as well as evidence that was gathered at the scene of the bombing. Because this was a collaborative effort, what I want to do...
All right, so we don't get much there from that individual. So that he's one of the U.S. attorneys, and he's saying, look, you know, this is it. We have enough forensic evidence. We have DNA evidence. We can confirm that it is this guy, Anthony Warner. And because this thing was a multivariate investigation, he just turns it over to the people who are actually doing the investigatory work. So he's with the U.S. Attorney's office. He's going to be prosecuting a crime if that is something that needs to be prosecuted. But it sounds like this thing is kind of closed, kind of like open and closed on this. Let's listen into the TBI officer. This guy, his name is David Rosh, and he confirmed this. I think this was Monday, so this may have been confirmed today. Here he is detailing some of the evidence that they've gathered, some of the forensic material, the DNA evidence.
Overnight, TBI forensic scientists processed evidence from the crime scene for DNA testing. The evidence was compared to evidence collected from a vehicle used by the person of interest in this case. At approximately midnight Central Time, forensic scientists with TBI confirmed a match of the DNA at both locations belonging to the person of interest in this case.
Wow.
TBI continues to support this ongoing investigation. Thank you.
All right, so basically another, no information almost at all, mirrors exactly what the U.S. Attorney General said. Now, he came in, to be fair, I did clip the first part of his statement. The first part of his statement, he comes out and he spends about a minute thanking everybody for the cooperation amongst all the different agencies who are involved, so that's nice. But then he just says, yeah, we've got some more DNA evidence here, and that DNA evidence is gathered from the scene, and they matched it to another vehicle that is back presumably at Anthony Warner's residence or some other facility. We also saw a lot of imagery, a lot of pictures and news stories saying that they were outside of his residence, and they got court orders and warrants and things like that. I haven't seen any of those documents yet, but that's what they're claiming happened. This guy comes out from the Tennessee Bureau of Investigations, their version of the FBI locally, and it says, yeah, we have some more DNA evidence. We don't know what it was. Was it a piece of hair? Was it a tooth, something that exploded? Was it a fingernail? Was it a limb? What do they have here that they can tell us matches the evidence that they gathered at his home residence? We don't know yet. Let's see if we can get a little bit more information from the FBI agent. So this is Doug Korneski, who gives us a little bit more information, and let's see what he has to conclude. Here is Doug Korneski over with the FBI.
I want to take a moment to update you on the intensive efforts of our investigative team. Today, as Director Roush mentioned, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, as well as the FBI laboratory in Quantico, Virginia, completed their DNA testing of a sample of human remains recovered at the scene. Those results were consistent with the suspect identified
he was present when the bomb went off,
Cochran.
and that he perished in the
Still
bombing.
following leads, but right now there is no indication that any other persons were involved.
No one else involved.
We reviewed hours of security video surrounding the recreational vehicle, as well as we saw no other people involved or around that vehicle. Again, this information is what we know after just a few days of investigative efforts. Crucial tips from the public.
All right, so, pretty cut and dry on that, right? We had 3 law enforcement officials, U.S. attorney, we had the TBI, we had the FBI. They all came out and they said, well, that's it. We watched a lot of security footage, only saw Warner out there. We did an independent DNA analysis, so the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, they did their check. The FBI did their check over at Quantico, and that's it, right? So open and shut. They are still looking for a motive, though. Nobody's been able to really pin that down. It says Warner of Antioch in Tennessee. So this is back to the original article that I was sharing over from CNN. It said he had previously not been on the law enforcement's radar, said David Roche, the TBI director. Remnants of the vehicle from the bombing were recovered from the scene, and investigators with the Tennessee Highway Patrol, they were able to determine the VIN number because it matched one of those vehicles that was registered to Warner. The repeated warnings and that early morning timing of the blast when few were around suggest that he did not intend to cause mass casualties. FBI agent Doug Korneski said they're interviewing people who knew him to try to learn a possible motive. There's no indication that anybody else is involved, he said. These answers won't come quickly, though we may be able to answer some of those questions. None of those answers will ever be enough for those affected by this event. And Warner's father apparently worked for AT&T, said the TBI, said investigators are looking into whether that may be relevant to the motive behind the bombing. So interesting story. It could be one of those where it is what it looks like. We have some kind of crazed person who wants to blow up something, and they just do that. Now, I've seen some other headlines and some other information saying that Warner was telling an ex-girlfriend that he had cancer and was sort of divesting himself of a lot of his assets. So I think he transferred his car, transferred his house, had really been giving up a lot of his possessions in order to lighten his load a bit, which, you could easily craft a narrative around that. If somebody has cancer, they're dying, maybe their father was cut out of, was forced into early retirement or something like that from AT&T. Could be just something simple. A guy just wanted to go out with a bang, literally, and did so. An alternative would be a lot of the other conspiracy theories that you're seeing around the internet. Haven't seen any evidence for them yet, but some people are saying that he was out there to sort of spread awareness about 5G internet. FBI was saying that maybe he was a 5G internet conspiracy theorist. Who knows what else is out there, but always a little bit interesting when law enforcement kind of comes out and they just close the door on this stuff very quickly. Reminds me a little bit, although this is a much less severe situation, of what we saw with the Las Vegas shooter. Remember how quickly they sort of pulled the lid on that? That was something that took place out of the Mandalay Bay some time ago, where there was a Las Vegas shooter, supposedly, who was acting alone, even though he had a couple dozen firearms in his hotel room, unleashing fire on a concert down below. And law enforcement came in real quickly and just sort of buttoned that up and put that on the back burner, put that back in the in the drawer underneath the desk where nobody looks, moved on to the next story. Kind of feels like that a little bit to me, or it could be just cut and dry. We'll see. If anything changes, we will make you aware of it, as long as you're here and joining us as we go through this journey. Let's change gears a little bit. Last week we talked a lot about this COVID bill, this behemoth, monster, $2.4 trillion federal bill that Congress had passed sort of in the dark of night, or let's say in the dark of the afternoon. They got presented with the bill that morning. They had about 2.5 hours to read through 5,500 pages of a document, and they all signed on to it. They passed it, both in the House and in the Senate. This massive bill landed on Trump's desk last week. Last week during our broadcast, he released a new video, a pre-recorded statement that said that he was sort of going to be thinking about vetoing this thing. He said he wanted to see a lot of the pork spending thrown out of the bill. He also wanted to see some changes to how much money Americans actually get. What is the relief? This is a COVID-19 relief bill. The bill, as it landed on his desk, was for $600 going to Americans, not $600 a month. Not $600 a week, just $600. That's it. That's all you get. And apparently that's going to be enough to help float people, even though many states around the country still have, 25% capacity at restaurants or 0% capacity, lockdowns across the board like in California. So people are hurting around the country. Industries are just being decimated across the board. And so as an everyday American, we're all just sitting here wondering, well, maybe the government's going to do something about this. Well, I'm not. I know that they're not going to do anything about it. But a lot of other Americans are thinking about it. They're wondering, maybe the government's going to give us a little bit of relief on this stuff. $600 is better than $0, right? That's what a lot of Congress thought. And so they signed this bill. They sent it over to Trump's desk. He put up a big fight about it last week and then signed it on Sunday morning. So Sunday afternoon. This story comes from the AP. It says Trump signs a massive measure funding the government and COVID relief. This comes from the AP, which is hilarious to think that this is even a news story. If you read this entire article, it looks like an opinion piece. I had to double check and make sure that it wasn't an opinion piece. I'm not positive about that, but it says that President Donald Trump signed a $900 billion pandemic relief package on Sunday, ending days of drama over his refusal to accept the bipartisan deal that will deliver long-sought cash to businesses and individuals to avert a federal government shutdown. It includes $1.4 trillion to fund government agencies through September and contains other end-of-session priorities such as an increase in food stamp benefits. The signing, which took place this weekend at his private club in Florida, came amid escalating criticism over his 11th hour demands for larger $2,000 relief checks and scaled back spending, even though the bill had already passed the House and the Senate by wide margins. It was passed by what lawmakers thought was with Trump's blessing, but apparently that wasn't the case. Lawmakers now, since Donald Trump signed it, they've got a little bit more breathing room to continue to debate the increase in checks, right? The big part of the argument last week was about the amount of relief that Americans are getting. They were saying it was going to be $600. Trump wanted $2,000. As soon as he did that, the Democrats were like, yeah, see, we told you. We've been saying $2,000 a lot this whole time. Some people are wanting to come and really like triple down on that. Yeah, for like 90 days. How about $2,000 a month for 3 months? How about $2,000 a month indefinitely? You can go the Andrew Yang proposal and just have universal basic income across the board. So they were very happy about that decision, but a lot of the Republicans were not. Last week we talked about Rand Paul, who said, no, it's too expensive. We can't just give money out. Mitt Romney was also chiming in saying, no, we can't afford it. Where's the money going to come from? And a lot of the Republicans were just sort of up in arms saying, well, now, suddenly they're fiscal conservatives now that we're talking about giving money back to the American people. They're not real fiscal when it comes to sending money over to Pakistan or to Nepal or to Cambodia or to Venezuela or to Israel or to any of these other places. A number of the different places that we talked about. I think the Sudan was getting $700 million for something. $1.5 billion to the Israelis, Cambodia, tens of millions of dollars, a lot of money going elsewhere. All of these politicians were very upset about Americans getting money, but I didn't hear much about foreign countries getting any money or the politicians getting a bunch of money with their pork barrel spending that's going to go back to their districts. Not a lot of outrage about any of that stuff, but they are very happy today that Donald Trump signed it. The compromise bill, this is according to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell over from Kentucky. He says, the compromise bill is not perfect, but it will do an enormous amount of good for struggling Kentuckians and Americans across the country who need help now. I thank the president for signing this bill into law. And then Nancy Pelosi is also very happy. She says, welcome news for the 14 million Americans who just lost the lifeline of unemployment benefits on Christmas weekend, and for the millions more struggling to stay afloat during the historic pandemic and economic crisis. So before we dive into some analysis on this, let's see what President Trump had to say. This is a statement from the president that came out yesterday, issued on December 27th from the White House. As President of the United States, this is Donald Trump. It is my responsibility to protect the people of our country from the economic devastation and hardship that was caused by the China virus. I understand that many small businesses have been forced to close as a result of harsh actions by Democrat-run states. Many people are back to work, but my job is not done until everyone is back to work. Fortunately, as a result of my work with Congress, in passing the CARES Act earlier this year, we avoided another Great Depression under my leadership. Project Warp Speed has been a tremendous success. My administration and I developed the vaccine many years ahead of wildest expectations, and we are distributing these vaccines and others soon coming to millions of people. As president, I've told Congress that I want far less wasteful spending and more money going to the American people in the form of $2,000 checks per adult and $600 per child. Then he says, as president, this is interesting. We're going to do a little bit of a fact check on some of this. He says, as president, I am demanding many rescissions under the Impoundment Control Act of 1974. The act provides that, quote, and this is under U.S. Code, Title II U.S. Code 683, says, Whenever the president determines that all or part of any budget authority will not be required to carry out the full objectives or scope of the programs for which it is provided, or that such a budget authority should be rescinded for fiscal policy or other reasons, including the termination of projects, the president shall transmit to both houses of Congress a special message, end quote. And then Trump says that is supposed to be for describing the amount to be reserved, the relevant accounts, and the reasons for the rescission and the economic effects of the rescission. He says, I will sign this bill, the omnibus and COVID package, with a strong message that makes clear to Congress that wasteful items need to be removed. I will send back to Congress a red line version, item by item, accompanied by the formal rescission request to Congress, insisting that those funds be removed from the bill. Well, we're going to read that here in a minute. He says, I'm signing this bill to restore unemployment benefits, stop evictions, provide rental assistance, add money for PPP, return our airline workers back to work, add substantially more money for vaccine distribution, and much more. On Monday, the House will vote to increase payments to individuals from $600 to $2,000. Family of four would receive $5,200, which is much bigger than, of course, the $600. He says, now this is where your eyebrows go, It says, additionally, Congress has promised that Section 230, which so unfairly benefits big tech at the expense of the American people, will be reviewed and either be terminated or substantially reformed. Okay, so Congress promises that they're going to get rid of Section 230, and then it's going to be terminated or substantially reformed. All right. It says, likewise, the House and Senate have agreed to focus strongly on the very substantial voter fraud which took place in the November 3rd elections. Another big fat eyebrow raise on that one. It says the Senate will start the process for a vote that increases the check to $2,000, repeals Section 230, and starts an investigation into voter fraud. Big tech must not get protections of Section 230. Vote fraud must be fixed, and much more incoming, and so on and so forth. All right. So we got to talk about, the good and the bad on this thing. Largely, well, before we do that, let's take a look at what he's talking about. So here's Donald Trump, who says that under this section right here, section U.S. Code, section 683, under Title II, let's go over to that specifically. So this is what good Lord. Folks, I'm a little bit rusty over here. As you can see, I'm having a difficult time. There we go. All right, so it says this is the section that he's citing. And remember what Donald Trump cited it for. He's saying, listen, when Congress passes a bill and it lands on my desk, I, as the president, I have authority now to use this provision of the U.S. Code to say, no, those spending items, you can't spend those, right? Here's why. Because the law grants him the ability to do that. This is under U.S. Code, section 683. Here it is. It says transmittal of a special message. Remember, that's what he was talking about. And he quoted a pertinent part of this, subsection A. It says, whenever the president determines that all or part of any budget authority will not be required to carry out the full objectives of the program. So basically what that is saying is if you go to your mom and you say, Mom, I need $10 to run a lemonade stand. It only costs you $8 to run a lemonade stand. Mom can say, okay, I know you want 10. You only need 8. I'm going to give you 8, even though you requested 10, and I expect you to do something with the 2. Right? You don't need that much money. We've seen it. It's been in action, and you just don't need it. Therefore, you're only going to get 8. So it says, or whenever all or part of the budget authority provided for only one fiscal year is to be reserved from obligation for such fiscal year, the president shall submit to both houses of Congress a special message that specifies all of these 5 different sub-items here. It says, number 1, the amount of the budget authority which he proposes to be rescinded, any account or department, the reasons why it should be rescinded, the maximum extent practicable, the estimated fiscal, economic, budgetary effects, the proposed rescission of the reservation, all facts and circumstances related to or bearing upon the proposed rescission. And then under subsection B, it says any amount, it says the requirement to make available for obligation, any amount of the budget authority proposed to be rescinded or that is reserved as set forth in such special message shall be made available for obligation unless within the prescribed 45-day period the Congress has completed action on a rescission bill rescinding all or part of the amount proposed to be rescinded or that is to be reserved. Funds made available for obligation under this procedure may not be proposed for rescission again. All right, so what does that mean? Let's take a little bit of a breakdown on that, it means that Congress has to pass another bill in order to rescind some of the items that were in the original bill. So the House passed the bill, the Senate passed the bill in overwhelming numbers. It landed on Donald Trump's desk. He signed it. And he said, along with that signature, I'm going to send it back to Congress and ask them to redline the bill. Now, I've redlined the bill. I've said, nope, Pakistan gender studies, no. 700 million to Nepal, no. Whatever. The list goes on and on. There's dozens of different areas and examples of ridiculous spending in this. Sends that back to Congress. Congress, in order to do something with it, they have to pass a new bill. It's the rescission bill that rescinds all or part of what was proposed. If they don't do that, then the bill that Donald Trump just signed goes right into law. So we have a couple things to ask. Congress promised to do something on Section 230. Are they going to do that? Remember, that was the basis for Trump vetoing a different bill, which was the defense authorization bill, the defense spending bill. So he kind of is conflating that with something else. He's bringing the Section 230 issue into this COVID-19 and spending bill, when largely that was removed and that was segmented out for the defense bill. So sort of bringing that over onto this debate when it wasn't previously. The other thing we have to ask is Congress going to open an investigation into election fraud? Does anybody think that that is going to happen? They have not done so thus far. They had one Senate hearing in front of the House Governmental Affairs Committee. Nothing in front of the Judiciary Committee. To my knowledge, I think only Senator Tuberville who's been hinting, waffling, kind of talking out of both sides of his mouth about objecting during the January 6th counting of the electoral votes. That's it. Is the Senate going to do any investigation into this? Haven't seen it. Is the House of Representatives going to do anything on this? Well, no, they're controlled by the Democrats. Are they going to open an investigation into the election? Probably not. So, Section 230, election investigation. Final one is, are they going to rescind the bill? Are they going to go through, look at all of Donald Trump's red lines, and pass a new bill to rescind some of the expenses in the COVID bill? If the answer that you're saying to yourself is no, you're exactly right. Of course, that's not going to happen. The AP story goes on. It says in his statement, Trump repeated his frustrations with the COVID-19 relief bill for providing only $600 checks instead of $2,000 that Republicans had already rejected. He also complained about what he considered unnecessary spending by the government at large. He said, I will sign the omnibus and COVID package with a strong message that makes clear to Congress that wasteful items need to be removed. While the president insisted he would send Congress a, quote, redlined version with items to be removed under the rescission process, those are merely suggestions to Congress. The bill as signed would not necessarily need to be changed. We just read the rule. It doesn't need to be changed. They got 45 days if they want to rescind it. Democrats, who have the majority in the House, immediately vowed to prevent any cuts. Democrats will, quote, reject any rescissions, end quote, submitted by the president, said Appropriations Committee Chairwoman Nita Louie, who's a Democrat from New York. She said that in a statement. So, swing and a miss from the Trump administration in my book. Very disappointing to me. I understand that Americans are hurting. I understand that the federal government wants unlimited spending, but I was a little bit hopeful that we would see a little bit more of a fight from the Trump administration. It's just disappointing across the board. When we were talking about this last week, we painted the picture for you about how most of the blame for this type of stuff falls in Congress, in my mind. Almost all of it. We'll say we'll give it 98%. But Donald Trump is responsible for the other 2% of my frustration on this. Congress, they had a 5,500-page bill that was dropped on all of the members' desks several hours before they were required to vote. They did so at the very last minute because they knew that today, Monday, was going to be the government shutdown. So they wait until the last possible minute. So it eliminates any options for Donald Trump. It eliminates any options for renegotiations. It prevents them from having to face the American people for a long period of time. You don't even have time to call your congressperson. You did not have time because they had passed the bill within a matter of hours. And that's not just me saying that. Even Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who is probably literally the exact opposite of me ideologically, she agrees. It's ridiculous, right? They're being held hostage, essentially. I think those were even her own words. It's government by hostage taking. They just drop a bill on your desk. You got to vote for it. And they all did. And none of them read it because it's impossible to read 5,500 pages in a couple hours. The American public didn't have a chance to read it. The last line of sort of the only speed bump in this process was Donald Trump. And even though Congress waited till the last minute and he basically had no other alternative, right? He couldn't say, go back and let's go to the drawing board. Maybe we can renegotiate this stuff. He bluffed. They called. He caved. He signed the bill. I don't think he got anything out of it, honestly. Not a single thing, which is unfortunate. I think Section 230 is going to be unchanged moving forward. We're going to see zero election interference, election fraud investigation from Congress, even though he put in his own statement that they were going to look into it. And, the bill gets signed. $2.4 trillion gone out the window for nothing. So bummer on that. Let's wrap up with some election litigation because we can't go too long without talking about election litigation news. This story comes over from Politico. We have a representative by the name of Louie Gohmert, who is a Republican out of Texas, who is suing Vice President Mike Pence. What? Why is a Republican suing another Republican? That doesn't make any sense. Well, it does, actually. We've seen this a lot. We saw this largely with the Democrats prior to the election. They were suing all sorts of election people. They were suing Kathy Boockvar in Pennsylvania. They were suing a number of different election boards across the country. They were suing Jocelyn Benson, I think, out of Michigan. All of these DNC groups, or the Michigan Alliance of People, who's sponsored by Priorities USA. There was all this big money sort of being washed around and then suing, one Democratic agency suing another Democrat. And that's just how these things work. So just because Representative Louie Gohmert is suing Mike Pence doesn't mean that they're actually opposed to one another. It just means that these are two parties to a legal issue, and they need to clear up what the rights are relative to these two parties. So Representative Gohmert is suing Vice President Mike Pence, and it's an interesting claim. So let's read this article, and then I'll frame it out a little bit more. So over from the Politico by this author named Kyle Cheney, says Rep. Louie Gohmert and Vice President Trump's defeated electors from Arizona may force Vice President Mike Pence to publicly pick a side in Trump's bid to overturn his 2020 election loss. Gohmert and a handful of would-be electors sued Pence in federal court on Monday in a long-shot bid to throw out the rules that govern Congress's counting of electoral votes next week. It's an effort they hope will permit Pence, who is tasked with leading the January 6th session of the House and the Senate, to simply ignore President-elect Joe Biden's electors and count Trump's losing slates instead. The lawsuit asserts that the 1887 law, known as the Electoral Count Act, the vague statute that has long governed the electoral vote counting process with minimal drama, unconstitutionally binds Pence from exercising total authority to choose which votes to count. All right. We've been talking about this issue a lot, ever since the election. Let's frame it out just a little bit more. So we've talked about what happens on January 6th. I played a video on this program from last time that we had this happen in January 6th, 2017. This was when Joe Biden was the vice president at the time and the president of the Senate. And when all of the states voted in 2016, many of them voted for Donald Trump. He won the election. Those votes were cast. They were certified by individual states, and they transitioned their way into the House of Representatives onto the floor in Congress. Well, the process there is that the vice president of the United States, who is also the president of the Senate, ultimately opens the ballots. Physically, literally, will take the ballot, open it, unseal it, pull out the certificate of ascertainment, pass it off according to the statutes to two tellers, and it gets into some specifics there, but is basically handing them off to other individuals who will then tally them, count up all the votes, and hand them back over to Mike Pence. In this case, they handed them back over to Joe Biden. At that point in time, according to the statute, once the vice president or the president of the Senate announces who won the total tally and proclaims the next president, that's the end of the vote. That's the end of the line. That's the process. Happened without any real problems in 2016. Joe Biden did it. Pretty cut and dry. People were wondering if he was going to object. Back then in 2016, Maxine Waters was on the Congress floor, waving around a document saying that you have to join me. I'm looking for a senator to join me. We want to object to these votes. They were trying to challenge Donald Trump's election the same way that Joe Biden's election is probably going to be challenged this next go round. So there's a sort of a history of this. And people were wondering, well, what if Mike Pence, when he's opening the votes, just doesn't count them, right? We saw that a number of states had dueling electors. In Arizona, what we had here was the certified official electors. Arizona went blue for Joe Biden. The Democratic electors, they met, cast their votes, certified by the governor. Those have been transmitted. They're on their way to the House of Representatives right now. But we also had a competing set of electors. Donald Trump's electors also went out and they also voted. They had their own little mock ceremony. Okay, Donald Trump didn't officially win the state of Arizona, but his electors still cast their vote, and we explained the reason for doing so. We explained why they needed to do that, just to sort of put a stake in the ground so that if something else came later down the road, let's say we fast forward a few days from now, right before January 6th, there's a huge bucket of votes in Arizona that were illegal. If you disqualify those, Trump wins Arizona. Well, if Trump doesn't have certified electors, then he loses that right to make the claim. We talked about the legal reasons for acting as though you had won. In case you did win, you can go back and say, see, I told you so, right? We talked about all of that. So this is not just unique to Arizona. In Nevada, they did this. A number of other states around the country, they have dueling electors that were all cast. So they're all on their way to the House of Representatives right now. Competing election votes, competing electoral votes. This is the theory. So the question is, well, what if Mike Pence, who's sitting there opening the envelopes, says, I got one here from Arizona certified. I've got one here from Arizona uncertified. What do I do? Which ones do I count? Which ones do I open and hand over to the teller? Well, we've been saying here, and the rules say, well, it's the ones that are certified, obviously. Those are the rules under the U.S. Code, which we've talked about here. We went through Section 7. We went all the way through Section 15, explaining what that act looks like. And it says that it's certified. Well, what this lawsuit is saying, no, that act is unconstitutional. They're saying that in this process, Mike Pence has the ability to decide. He can look at both slates of electors and make a decision. Okay, we have not seen this type of claim before. And we even got this question before. People were asking, well, what if Mike Pence just chooses to count Trump's electors? Right? He's sort of the bottleneck there. It all comes to him. All of the votes are going to come to him. It's a ceremonial role, but he's the one who opens and counts. So if that were the case, and he just threw out the Joe Biden votes, could he single-handedly reelect Donald Trump? That's what Louie Gohmert wants. Let's take a look at the lawsuit. All right, so it says here, this was filed in the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Texas. And let's take a look at who is suing whom here. We have Louie Gohmert, who is the representative from the state of Texas. We have Kelly Ward, who's the Senate or the Arizona GOP chairwoman. And a number of these other people, I believe they're all electors. Okay, so these are the people who would have voted for Donald Trump had he actually won the state. They would have cast their elector votes there. And they're suing Vice President Mike Pence of the United States in his official capacity. They're asking for a couple different things: expedited declaratory and emergency injunctive relief. So expedited declaratory relief means that they're looking for just a declaration from the court. They just want the court to say this is the way something is. And they want it quickly because January 6th is right around the corner. They're also asking for emergency injunctive relief, which means they're asking the court to do something. So declaratory is they just want them to say something the way something is. Injunctive relief is they want them to actually do something. So let's take a look and let's break down this lawsuit so we can sort of piece together what is going on here. Number one, they are challenging the Electoral Count Act, specifically Section 15 and Section 5. They're saying, but both those sections are unconstitutional because they violate the Electors Clause and the 12th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. All right, so that's pretty important. So let's break that up. The Electors Clause is really the part of the Constitution that says that the legislative branch has the authority to govern their elections. And the 12th Amendment is it's a complicated, messy amendment, but it's how we elect people. It's how we sort of run the Electoral College and how this process works. And if you read them, we've done it multiple times here on this program, they're confusing, right? And there's some holes and they kind of don't cover everything. So what happened in the 1800s is the U.S. Congress, they passed the U.S. Code and they implemented the Electoral Count Act, which adds a little bit of meat to the bones of the Constitution. They say, okay, well, if this happens again, where we have problems counting votes, which had happened, I think, in 1867, somewhere in that area. We were having a lot of issues counting votes because we were just coming out of the Civil War. We had the Reconstruction era. Southern states were not happy with the northern states. They were sort of dueling it out in the election of Rutherford B. Hayes, and they put together a committee that basically decided who's going to be the next president, right? It wasn't a popular vote or electoral vote thing per se. It was they established a committee to decide how to challenge or how to resolve contested electoral votes. The committee decided who the next president was. And so they said, this is a problem. We need to pass some more clear rules on how this stuff works. Well, what this lawsuit and what Gohmert are saying is that the new rules under the U.S. Code are unconstitutional because they are in direct opposition to the underlying constitutional rule, which is what we see in the Electors Clause and under the 12th Amendment. So they're saying they're directly opposed to one another. Two areas of law that are in play right now conflict. When that happens, the U.S. Code has to give way to the underlying Constitution. The Constitution is supreme. It's a supreme document. Everything emanates from that. Nothing can be in conflict with it. So the U.S. Code here, according to this lawsuit, is in conflict with those underlying provisions. It's got to go. Let's break that down a little bit further. It says that these provisions of Section 15, they're unconstitutional because they establish procedures for determining which of two or more competing slates of electors are to be counted in the Electoral College. So how objections to be proffered are adjudicated, and those violate the 12th Amendment. So they're saying the 12th Amendment tells us how to deal with competing electors. It's saying the 12th Amendment also tells us how to deal with objections. But Section 15 of the Electoral Count Act are superseding this. They're in conflict of that. This violation occurs because the Electoral Count Act directs the defendant, Vice President Pence, in his capacity as the President of the Senate, to do these three things. Number one, they're saying that the Electoral Count Act tells Vice President Pence to count the electoral votes for a state that have been appointed in violation of the Electors Clause. We're going to get into that. It says, number two, it limits or eliminates his exclusive authority and sole discretion under the 12th Amendment to determine which slate of electors for a state may be counted. Okay, so you see that claim? They're saying that Vice President Pence has the exclusive and sole discretion to decide which electoral votes to count. And thirdly, they're saying this replaces the 12th Amendment's dispute resolution procedure, under which the House of Representatives has sole authority to choose a president. So three big claims there. Very interesting issue. We've talked about this a lot on this channel. What can President Pence do? Many people, I think last week, were even talking about the hashtag Pence card, right? As if Vice President Pence is just going to take the podium, the gavel, and just reelect Donald Trump on his own. Kind of an interesting claim. Paragraph 3 of this lawsuit says that the Electoral Count Act, which is the new code, says that it unconstitutionally violates the Electors Clause because it usurps authority of state legislatures to determine how they appoint electors, and it gives the state's authority to the state's executive. Okay, U.S. Code makes clear that a presidential elector of a state and their appointment shall be conclusive as long as they're appointed by the state executive. They're also saying that this is not an abstract or hypothetical question. This is a live case or controversy. It's ripe for declaratory judgment because Arizona and many other states have 2 competing slates of electors. All right, so a couple things on this. Number one, they're going to address the standing thing. They're going to address the ripeness, the case and controversy stuff, sort of all of the pre-litigation excuses that we've seen cases be thrown out for: latches, mootness, ripeness. We've seen case and controversy, political question. All of these bases for throwing cases out, they're trying to address that here. I don't think that paragraph does enough to do that. That is a very long lawsuit, so you can go through and they buttress each one of these points with a lot of other information and case law and explanations. But what they're saying here is that this is a real deal. We need a decision on this because Vice President Pence has not done this yet, right? It's not moot because January 6th hasn't come and gone. If we have a decision from this court proceeding, and let's say, for example, the court comes out and says, yeah, Mike Pence does have exclusive authority to count the votes. Well, on January 6th, he has a new power that he probably didn't know he had. So that's what they're arguing. This is important. The court has to decide this stuff. The other issue here, though, is that they're saying that a state legislature cannot delegate certain things to the executive. In other words, what they're saying is that by doing so, they're violating the underlying electors clause. So put it another way, a state legislature has the exclusive power under the Constitution to run their own elections. If a state legislature delegates that to the executive branch, which is the government, the Secretary of State, what Rep. Louie Gohmert and his other plaintiffs here, they're saying that you can't do that. You can't delegate that over to an executive. I think the response to that is you sure can, right? A legislature can just decide whatever they want. If they want to relieve themselves of the burden of conducting their own elections, they can delegate that over to the executive branch. And I think there's pretty good precedent for that, actually, right? We're talking about separation of powers, but if the legislature is the body that's responsible for passing the laws and the executive branch is the body that's responsible for executing the laws, then the legislature can execute the laws and the executive branch the legislature can pass the laws, the executive will execute the laws. And kind of what's happening here, right? If a legislature decided that they're going to delegate a lot of this electoral stuff to the executive branch, the Secretary of State or anybody who runs them in their locale, they're free to do that, right? But they're saying they can't do that. So if this were to go the other way, would we see the end of any executive management of our elections? It seems like a pretty big ask. Let's see. Okay, so there's a good section here that details how their argument works. I want to go through it, sort of in the weeds just a little bit. Then we're going to wrap up with what they're asking for. Then we'll jump into the super chats. All right, so this is a little bit thick on the text. This comes from paragraph 33, and this is how they're constructing their argument. It says the 12th Amendment. It sets forth procedures for counting electoral votes and for resolving disputes over whether and which electoral votes may be counted. So they're saying, look, the 12th Amendment, this is what we should be using as our governing rule. It sets forth the procedures. The first section describes the meeting of the Electoral College and the procedures up to the casting of the electoral votes by the electors in their respective states. It said this happened on December 14th, and on January 6th, we're going to be counting these things. This is the text from the 12th Amendment. It's really messy. It says the electors shall meet in their respective states and vote by ballot for president and vice president, one of whom at least shall not be an inhabitant of the same state with themselves. They shall name in their ballots the person voted for as president, and in distinct ballots, vice president. They shall make distinct lists of all the persons voted for president, of all the persons who voted for vice president, and the number of the votes each, which list they shall sign and certify and transmit sealed to the seat of the government of the United States, directed to the president of the Senate. Okay, that's it. Pretty clear. They meet, they vote, and they're all directed to the president of the Senate. Okay, that's it. That key is important. Meaning Vice President Pence is in receipt of all of them. If some of them want to make it into the wastebasket because he doesn't think that they're certified, you can make the argument that, right? They're all going to him. They're in his inbox. They're saying that is under the U.S. Constitutional Amendment 12. Paragraph 34, the second section describes how defendant Vice President Pence in his role shall, quote, count the electoral votes. We have one sentence here. It says, the President of the Senate shall, in the presence of the Senate of the House of Representatives, open all the certificates and the votes shall then be counted, period. Okay, none of that other stuff that you see under the Electoral Count Act. Paragraph 35 goes on. It says, under the 12th Amendment, Defendant Pence alone has the exclusive authority, this is according to their argument, the exclusive authority and sole discretion to open and permit the counting of the electoral votes for a given state. And where there are competing slates of electors or where there is objection to any single slate of electors, to determine which electors' votes and whether none shall be counted. So that's the language that they're referencing. They're going directly back to the Constitution, directly back to the 12th Amendment. If you read Section 7 all the way through Section 15 of the Electoral Count Act, which we've done here, you'll notice that the rules that have been passed by Congress and are implemented into law, they're a lot more detailed, right? That's where we talk about the contingent election. That's where we talk about the breaking off for debates. I mean, there's a lot in there. I think that's in the same provision. We've talked about so many different provisions here. But what they're saying is none of that matters. It doesn't matter what it is. They're saying none of it matters. The only thing that matters is the 12th Amendment. And under the 12th Amendment, as we can see here, the states should vote. They should go through this big, long paragraph, all this stuff, all this voting here, distinct list of persons, all the persons voted, number of votes each, blah, 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 blah. That's all great. They can all do that stuff. It all goes, when they fill out the envelope, it goes to the President of the Senate. That's Mike Pence. Then he, and he alone, or she, when we have that, says the President, that person shall open all certificates and the votes shall then be counted. So it's kind of a big deal, right? It kind of makes that job the most important job in the history of the country, right? It's the most important person in the country every time we have a presidential election. Because if that person just decides that they don't want those votes to be counted, they can just say, okay, well, this one came from Pennsylvania. This one also came from Pennsylvania. This one was signed by Governor Tom Wolf. This one was signed by, I don't know. I don't like Tom Wolf. I don't like what happened in Pennsylvania. Not going to count those. These are garbage certificates of ascertainment. These are the right ones. We're going to count those. Give those over to the teller. The teller then rallies them all up. In my mind, that is sort of an absurd conclusion legally, right? That you would give somebody that amount of discretion or interpret the law in that way. I see how you can make the argument, right? The 12th Amendment is pretty unclear about this. You can see it says it's directed to the President of the Senate. President of the Senate opens all the certificates and the votes shall then be counted. And they're saying, well, that's all that we've got there. So that means that when the votes shall be counted by the Vice President, they've got a lot of discretion on how to count those, right? That's up to them. The purview of how to do that stuff is delegated to that individual to do it. So it's sort of an absurd result. If you just think about it practically, if you have all 50 states go through election processes, the legislatures delegate the authority to an executive person to certify the election and then transmit those votes over. Those votes get transmitted over. Somebody just who's the vice president just says, no, I don't like any of those votes. In other words, why wouldn't Donald Trump, if Vice President Pence was really, really loyal to him and wanted a second term as a vice president, why wouldn't he just only count the Donald Trump votes? Right? I mean, that happened every time. It's absurd. So I understand the argument, but I just don't think it's going to go anywhere. Here is what they're asking for. Plaintiffs respectfully request this court to issue a declaratory judgment finding that Sections 5 and 15 of the Electoral Count Act are unconstitutional because they violate the 12th Amendment. So that's their sort of declaratory. They want to say that those are unconstitutional. Vice President Pence, they want him in his capacity. They want to say that he is subject solely to the requirements of the 12th Amendment and may exercise the exclusive authority and sole discretion in determining which electoral votes to count for a given state and must ignore and may not rely on any provisions of the Electoral Count Act that would limit his exclusive authority and his sole discretion to determine the count, which would include votes from the slates of Republican electors from contested states. And then finally, in paragraph C, they're saying that with respect to completing slates of electors from the state of Arizona or other contested states, that the 12th Amendment says the exclusive dispute resolution mechanisms are within that amendment. It says, namely, Vice President Pence determines which slate of electors count. Number one. Number two, how objections from members of Congress are adjudicated. Number three, if no candidate has a majority of 270 electoral votes, the House of Representatives shall choose the president by representation from each state having one vote, which again is back from the 12th Amendment. So pretty big ask there, right? They're asking a court to go out and invalidate a provision of the U.S. Code that's been around for well over about 150 years now, 150 years-ish right now. I don't do math very well, as you know, if you've been a regular of this channel, but a long time, and something that we've used repeatedly. They're going to try to say that that is supposed to be, that's unconstitutional. Vice President Pence ultimately has the authority to declare the next president, which is sort of an absurd extension of everything. But we'll see what happens there. In other words, don't get your hopes up over that lawsuit. A lot of news around it, but it seems like a bit of a stretch. All right, let's go into the super chats. If you've been waiting around, we are finally going to get there. We have, starting off the day, who else? We have Wolfgang Deo, who says, hi, Rob, Faith, Ma, and all. Bye, trolls. Hope y'all had a relatively silent Christmas. It was pretty quiet, but we got a lot of good family time in, and we're back. We're back and with you, so we're good to be back. Thanks, Wolfgang, for getting us started off. Oh, yes, we missed Rob and Faith and Ma, and of course, Mr. Wolfgang. Let's grind through the legal paperwork and come up with our own answers. That comes from Ron B. Thanks, Ron B. We had a little bit of that today. We have Wolfgang Deo, another one, says, the bombing made me realize that there is a significant problem caused by the idea of crime fighting. It shouldn't be a crime until a judge says so. Yeah, so I'm not sure why the bombing triggered that, but, you know, technically we do have a couple different ways that crimes come into fruition. Number one, the legislature passes a law about those things. Those take effect, and that's a law. And judges will also ask prosecutors to basically sign a probable cause statement and to swear under oath, attest that there is enough probable cause for charges. So kind of a judge sometimes does get involved. Not every time, but sometimes. Thanks, Wolfgang. We have Pinky, too, who says there is a rumor going around Facebook that Dominion voting machines had recently been moved to the AT&T building. What do you think? Pinky, very interesting. I had not seen that one. I love a good rumor and a good conspiracy theory sort of as much as the next person. I think it's very interesting to sort of just toy around with those ideas. You know, I don't know any more than what we've seen in the media. It does seem a little bit weird that, you know, he just parked his truck outside of an AT&T building, blew that building up. They had a lot of communications problems throughout the rest of the state for some period of time. I think they're still scrambling to fix a lot of their phone systems. But, you know, I mean, you can explain that easily as just a crazy guy who had cancer and he wanted to go out with a bang, literally. So, you know, it's sort of fun to sort of tease around in your mind, but I wouldn't take any of those claims too seriously. We have Car Connection Online says, Robbie Rob, convoy is ready. First stop, Delaware, to protest pseudo-president-elect Beijing Biden will make him come out of his basement. Car Connection Online is rallying a crew. They're on their way, it sounds like, over to Delaware, maybe making their way out on January 6th to Washington, D.C. I wish you very well. Go check out Car Connection Online if you want to join that rendezvous out there to be a part of making America America. We have Wolfgang Deo, who says, I mean, of course, this was a crime, but still, maybe the guy was framed, even if he had explosive permits and all that, suspension of judgment. I don't know that you can get explosive permits that would blow up a city block. I haven't seen that, but I could be wrong. We have KEZ, who says, another closed set government-controlled demolition psyop, very kind of the perp to not want to hurt anyone. Shaking my head, hoax psyop to vilify the right. You know, those are interesting. You know, it just feels weird anytime that the government comes out and they just wrap everything up with a nice little bow on it. They say, hey, Merry Christmas. Hey, we know who he was. We got DNA. Even though the entire city block was decimated, basically vaporized, we saw other vehicles. I had a hard time looking at some of those cars and deciding what make and model they are, right? I can't even tell what kind of car it is, but apparently they found a tooth or a hair follicle or something somewhere, and they had enough of it to run a DNA test and corroborate it with some other guy. End of story, case closed, move on. Feels a little bit weird. It could be that simple. I don't know. This is sort of the downside of not being on the other side of the investigation. All we can do is comment on the news. Thanks, KEZ. Interesting. We have another one from Wolfgang, who says, I just feel something sketchy on the official side, just a feeling, likely nothing, maybe just distrust of authorities after the rest of 2020. And I think you and me both, Wolfgang. I have a really difficult time trusting the experts on basically anything, because mostly they've been wrong, or if they haven't been wrong, they've been actively, willfully lying to you, right? We just saw this news story from Anthony Fauci, who says that, well, we're just kind of making guesstimates as we go along through this thing. And yeah, we can tell. We know that nobody has any idea what the hell you're doing. Okay. They're locked down to hell in California, and their numbers are still spiking through the roof the last I checked. So we appreciate all you trying to do what you think is best for all of us, but maybe the best method, the best resolution here is to just give us the information and let us, as intelligent, thinking, reasoning, logical individuals, just allow us to process things on our own. We don't need you to process it for us and then spoon feed us your lies and your garbage. We're all kind of sick of it. So Wolfgang, I think your disdain and distrust for some of the so-called experts is well-founded. We have another one from Wolfgang. He says, they keep calling 5G paranoias conspiracy theorists. This guy had some computer background. The thing is, the actual standard for 5G is bad. I don't know much about 5G other than, I'm seeing these new weird things go up around all over the place, but if they tell us it's safe, and I guess I'll take their word for it on that one. Wolfgang, another one. Wolfgang, you're hot today. He says, UBI would actually allow us to cut back all foreign aid and other problems. If they need to take money out of supply, increase taxes. It is fiat. Yeah, so UBI, it's an interesting idea. It's one of those things that I think would be interesting to experiment in sort of a small scale setting. We've talked about this concept that the individual states in the United States are, according to Sandra Day O'Connor, I think is the originator of the quote, who was a U.S. Supreme Court justice. She said that individual states are laboratories of democracy, and different states can experiment with different versions of democracy and try new things, try different things. In Oregon right now, they're trying a lot of drugs and psilocybin and medical mushrooms and all that stuff. So, okay, try it. See how it works. If it works well, great. Try UBI somewhere else. See how that works out for you. If it works great, maybe it's something that we can modify for the rest of the country. I'm open to the conversation about it. I think it's probably a terrible idea, and that most people are not going to do well under a system like that, but I'm open to being wrong. Thanks, Wolfgang. We have another one from Jeff Doe, who says, I cannot believe Trump signed the bill with all the pork in the bill. I hope he thinks it's worth it. Me too, Jeff. Very, very disappointed. I understand it from Trump's perspective. I understand that basically, he's got to sign this thing. He's on the edge of a hard deadline. My disappointment with him was objecting to it so hard, right? If he would have just come out and just said, listen, you guys are, he could have made a statement, signed it, and then been done with it. By objecting to it, I think he just undermined his own credibility, right? I wish he would have come out and made a statement and then stuck by the statement. If you really thought it was bad, if you really thought it was ridiculous, all right, put your money where your mouth is. You are the president. You have the authority. You have the power to veto that thing. You're going to get skewered left and right over it. You're already getting skewered left and right over it. So maybe, make them work for it. The Congress and the Senate, they were going to override his veto anyways. If he would have vetoed it, they would have just overridden it. So he could have done that, but at least he would have gone down with a little bit of a fight in him, rather than just capitulate. It really is a bummer that he had to sign that thing. Wolfgang Deo says Section 230 is a COVID issue. In addition to a national security issue, big tech prevented the COVID discussion, leading to massive harm. Very good point, Wolfgang Deo. Yeah, Section 230 has been sort of given them unlimited power to craft the narrative throughout the country. We've seen it a number of times. They're deleting Dr. Ron Paul's videos, who is a doctor talking about the COVID stuff. So they're clearly controlling the narrative. They told us what we can talk about the election stuff. Certainly that has impacted how we talk about things. It's impacted how other content creators talk about things. I know a lot of other content creators have just gotten off of the topic altogether. They just said, I'm not talking about it anymore because they don't want to lose their channel. So, which I can understand and respect. So, when you have this sort of intrusion into some of the conversations that we are allowed to have and not have. I think that makes them much more like a publisher, and they should be subject to some of the same restrictions or some of the same, at least possibilities of liability that other publishers have. It's a good point, though. If they're controlling, let's say, for example, the hydroxychloroquine thing, right? If some people believe that works, maybe it does work for some people. That group of people are not getting information about it. Might not be good for them, and it could have been. We have another one from Wolfgang who says, when printing money, send some overseas. It is now on individual Democrats to go against Pelosi, and with Trump, I see this as a win. We have AL who says explosion timing is suspicious, deflected attention from the 1224 Rochester, New York printer fire that had reprinted over 100,000 absentee ballots in September. Ooh, see, that's interesting. Yeah, when you start to see, sort of a deflection, that type of stuff, I believe, is very likely to happen, right? The news, I think, focuses on one story versus another that serves them. It doesn't only it serves their eyeballs, certainly, right? It serves viewership. They want to talk about the juicy stories, the more exciting stories. We've heard this as long as we've been alive. If it bleeds, it leads, right? An explosion is going to be a lot more interesting than some printer fire place that happened in Rochester, New York. Right, so they're going to cover that. But it's also pretty damn convenient, right? A lot of people are talking about election stuff. A lot of people are concerned about COVID and all these things. And suddenly on Christmas Day, you get an explosion. Doesn't really kill anybody, but it definitely focuses the attention. And people come back after the holiday break talking about the explosion. So it is interesting. And if you think that they don't craft narratives like that, I would encourage you to wake up a little bit, right? Every single day we wake up to a narrative. We just have to decide what the narrative is and who's crafting that narrative. If you're reading the news as just a consumer of the media, you're just sitting there just gobbling it in. Okay, well, they said this, so that must be the truth. Well, you're missing a whole part of the game. The whole part of the game is they want to move you to do something, whether that's click another article, get enraged, sign an online petition, donate money to a politician, click an advertiser, sign up for an email list. There's a call to action on everything that you're seeing. You just have to decide what it is and whether you want to be called into that action. But if you're just observing this stuff and thinking that you're just sort of letting this stuff flow through you like osmosis, it's not how it works. You're being corralled to do something. You just don't know what exactly yet. We have Wolfgang Deo who says, can Pence plead the fifth on that lawsuit? 8 more years. Can Pence plead the fifth? He could, Wolfgang. He could. He won't. They're going to respond. I think that judge is going to dismiss that lawsuit pretty quickly. We have Wolfgang Deo, another one, who says people that are involved in an election need to swear an oath. Let them know that they are to do their best, or it will be held against them. And Wolfgang, I think that is a pertinent point, right? We've talked about this here. If you are involved in an election, in my mind, you should be as open and transparent and accountable as humanly possible. We should be able to go into Dominion and say, open your books. Listen, if you want another contract with the state of Arizona, we want to see how you ran the election. We want to see what you're doing, how you're doing it, when you're doing it, who's funding this, what's in the source code, all that stuff. Because if we're going to trust you to run the election, we want to make sure we know who you are. It's very important, right? It's like vetting a lawyer. Yeah, you should vet your attorney. You should vet your contractor. You should vet your doctor. We should vet the people who run our elections. And if they're not willing to be open and accountable to us, they don't get the contract. They don't get the job. Somebody else does. We have another one from Jeff Doe who says, I love the fact you show documents and explain. You won't see this on the mainstream media. Yeah, Jeff, it's what we wanted to do here. On the mainstream news, you get a lot of headlines, bullet points here and there, but show you the documents, make the arguments, try to steel man some opposite arguments, and see if we can tease out some useful information from time to time. Thanks, Jeff. Another one from Wolfgang says, at this point, if martial law or military is involved, I have no position. Biden and his supporters have lost all legitimacy with me. God help us. No position. I still oppose martial law. I still oppose the military involvement. I think we are a nation of laws. One of the things that we're mostly concerned about with this election kerfuffle is that a lot of the laws were sort of broken or manipulated around the edges. They were changed at the very last minute. which is what we've been documenting here for weeks before the election and all of the weeks after the election, talking about how judges were sort of stepping on the toes of the legislature, manipulating some of the rules. Election boards, commissioners, and all sorts of individuals were kind of right around the margins of the election rules, making it easier for in my mind, malfeasance. That is a violation of the law. We're upset about that. We want a return to law. By bringing in the military or martial law, we're eliminating civilian law in favor of a military law. I'm not comfortable with that. We have another one from Claire DeLuna, who says, Happy New Year and Merry Christmas, Robert and Faith. I'm pretty busy, but glad I could catch this one. Like the stream. It helps the algorithm. Thanks, Claire. I appreciate it. And it really does. It actually does. We've noticed it. Miss Faith and I were looking back and we were looking at videos, and the ones that have more likes have more views. It's weird. It bumps it. So we'd appreciate it. Another one from Jeff Doe, who says, the people need to understand that election fraud is not a right or left issue. It is an American issue. All should be concerned. 100% agree, Jeff. 100% agree. I think that, if I were in Joe Biden's position and I was confident that there was no electoral fraud, you think that the best thing that he could do right now to help eliminate this stuff, to help eliminate the illegitimacy of his presidency. Let me back up on this. If Joe Biden is elected currently right now, right, if he takes office on January 20th, okay, something like 70 million Americans, maybe more than that, 74, 80 million Americans, if you look at the polls, have some questions about the legitimacy of his election. When you are in a position of power and about half the country thinks that you're illegitimate, makes your job as a president very, very difficult. Okay, it's already going to be difficult because he's inheriting a very divided country right now, which is not a problem, right? We're always divided. That's okay. The bigger issue is whether he's deemed to be legitimate or not. Okay, you can have a president in office that you are in disagreement with. The country's divided over. We just spent 4 years with Trump. We're all right. But most of the country at least acknowledged that he won the presidency. There was a lot of backbiting about that for 2 years, 3 years almost. The Mueller report, large swaths of the Democratic Party were thinking that he was not a legitimate president. And it really hurt his presidency. Now magnify that. Amplify that up. Now Joe Biden takes office and a bigger portion of the country thinks he's even more illegitimate. Huge problem. It's going to be a problem for the Democrats. In my mind, if I were in their shoes and I was confident that there was no electoral fraud or anything, I would just say, listen, I agree. Let's do a full audit on all these states. We'll help pay for it. We'll do whatever it takes. Redo Georgia, redo Wisconsin. Let's not redo the election, but just do an audit. Sure. Audit. There you go. Across the board. Not even contest this stuff. Just let it go through. And you say, see, told you so, right? That would be very satisfying. And I think it would help mitigate a lot of the animosity and the outrage. But you would think that they would want to sort of consolidate their ability to govern once they do take office, and they're not doing it. So sort of disappointing. I would like to see, my other point on this is that if the Democrats did cheat their way into power this time, the Republicans are eventually going to learn how they did it, and they're going to do it themselves. Then we're going to get into a position where the Republicans are out cheating the Democrats, or they're both trying to out cheat one another. And then we just have this facade of a government that's even more of a facade than it is currently. Thanks, Jeff. Another one from Roma Sumar, who says the saddest part about the porkulus bill story is that these Congress people will still keep getting reelected. I know. There's no ramifications for it. Americans have a very short memory. I was thinking back to Donald Trump has done this before, by the way. I think right after he got in office, they passed another massive, just disgusting, horrendous bill. I wasn't doing the show at this point in time, but had I been, I would have been as outraged about that last bill. But it was early on in his term, and he signed that bill, and I remember going, oh, damn it. Like, didn't you just say that you were going to get elected to stop this crap? And he signed it anyways. And he had a big finger wagging, after the fact, saying, I will never do this again. You understand me? You put me on over a barrel right here. You cram this thing down my throat. I will never do this again. Look it up. He said that. Fast forward a couple years later, boom, does it right again. Not even think twice about it. He thought twice about it a little bit, but did it anyways. And same thing with all these Congress people. Josh Hawley, who I was kind of optimistic about as being an interesting candidate, he signed it. I was very disappointed with him and a number of other senators who I thought were interesting candidates, and they all just folded like cheap suits. And then when Donald Trump came out and awoken the sleeping beast, sort of poked the bear a little bit, they backpedaled as hard as they could. Oh, you're right. We wanted more and we should have done this and all this stuff. It's not going to matter. Trump signed it. It's now going to become law. End of the story. We're going to be, a few of us are going to be angry for, I don't know, a week. We'll fast forward until the next thing that pops up, and they'll get reelected. They've got, they know if you're a senator, the American people have, I don't know, 4 or 5 years to cool down. So they don't have any problem passing this stuff. They don't have to pay for it. They're not accountable to it. And what are we going to do about it? Vote in someone else? Americans don't do that. They like their congresspeople. We have Husker Mike, who says, as always, love your show. Keep up the great work. Thanks, Husker Mike. I appreciate it. Thanks for the support and for being here. We have another one from AL, says, out of curiosity, what would be the electoral vote count for each candidate if Pence counted both slates from each contested state? Thank you for all that you do. Thanks, AL. That's a good question. That would require me to do a lot of math on the fly, which I am terrible at, so I'm not going to attempt to do that. But I think I heard that there were 6 states. Remember, I think Trump would really only need... Here's the way that it would ultimately work. This is, I think, the best strategy, which is where I think your question is going, would be that in Congress, what would need to happen is that the total electoral votes for all candidates would have to be under 270. If that happens, that triggers the contingent election. That's where each state gets one vote. Donald Trump has more state legislatures than the Democrats do, so they would win by, I think, one state, 26 to 24, if they all voted according to their legislatures. So I think that would really be the mode of success in the House of Representatives when the votes are counted. And so what would need to happen is objections would come in, or Vice President Pence, if he threw out, let's say 6 states that are all sort of contested battleground states, if all of those were thrown out, Joe Biden doesn't meet the 270. So he's under that threshold, which triggers the contingent election. Very good question. We have Wolfgang Deo, who says, I found a letter from me to Joe Biden from 2012. It says, I guess I voted in Virginia this election. By the way, we should kindly demand $10,000 checks. So be careful about where you're voting from there, Wolfgang. And $10,000 checks, it may be coming, right? If government is just going to keep promising people more money and people are just going to keep voting themselves a raise every time they have the opportunity, we might be in for $10,000 checks here soon. Now, everything else might cost a lot of money too. So your $2 gallon of milk is going to cost probably $25 at that point, $35, but you'll get your $10,000 and you'll have some politician to thank for that. We have another one from Wolfgang who says, constitutional loophole, LOL. That's how it is because the legislature declared it in an amendment. Amend the Constitution if you don't want Queen Kamala. We have another one from Steam Allwest. Can you explain what plenary means with Pence and Congress? Plenary means just all of the power. You have it all. Okay, we've given you everything. So if you Google plenary, it's going to say sort of all-encompassing, I believe. It's going to say, they have total authority to do it. It's not one of those things that's sort of half in one or half in the other. So what it means with regard to Pence and Congress is they're saying that Vice President Pence has the total authority to decide what to do with those votes. So in other words, as we read under the 12th Amendment and the Constitution, they're saying that when the certificates of ascertainment are authored and drafted, and those are sent they're sent literally to the President of the Senate. That's what the 12th Amendment says. They're saying that that's it. Mike Pence has the sole authority, plenary power, all of it, in receiving those documents. What he does with them from that point in time, it's up to him. Total discretion to do it. Congress, by contrast, they don't have plenary power over that process. And what the lawsuit is alleging is that what they have tried to do is pass U.S. code, which sort of takes the 12th Amendment and adds a bunch of different mechanisms on there. And they're saying those different mechanisms are undermining the original meaning, the original rule under the 12th Amendment. And because it's interfering with something in the Constitution, it cannot supersede the Constitution. It's attempting to do so, but it can't. Therefore, it's unconstitutional, and it needs to be thrown out, which would then revert all of the power back to Vice President Pence. So they're trying to throw out Section 5, Section 15, get rid of the Electoral Count Act, leave it all with Pence, because they're saying Congress, because he has plenary power, Congress doesn't have any power. They tried to get power, but they don't have it. It's unconstitutional. It is an interesting question, and I don't know that it goes anywhere in court, but it's a good argument, I think. It's an interesting argument. We have Sharon Quidney who says, I agree, Rob, that the Gohmert lawsuit probably isn't going anywhere in spite of its creativity. It would also set an extremely dangerous precedent. And we have another one from Sharon who says, our democratic republic seems to be descending or has already descended into oligarchy. See Robert Michaels. What think you? So 2 questions on that. The first one is the Gohmert lawsuit. Yeah, I think it is a creative argument. You know, I'm as much of an originalist and a textualist. I like to sort of look at the original document. I think that, yes, the 12th Amendment is important. We should give it a lot of weight. You know, anything in the Constitution, we should give the utmost amount of weight. But to say that the vice president can suddenly just throw out a bunch of votes and basically elect himself or herself the next president is an absurd proposition. And when you're asking for a relief that sort of is promoting an absurd proposition that undermines the very fabric of the rest of how we govern ourselves is, you know, it's a long shot. It's a creative argument. I think that it is, it's interesting because you can, I think, make that argument under the original 12th Amendment. I don't think that it is sort of a logical explanation. You know, if the relief was granted, it might be great for Vice President Pence and all of the people who want Trump to be elected again. But the next time this happens, whoever the vice president of the Senate is going to literally be the only person who gets to elect the next president. Anything else that anybody else does anywhere, any legislature, any popular vote, doesn't matter, because all they can do is just say, I don't like those votes. Garbage, count those, and so on. We don't want to live in that country. Next question from Sharon. Our democratic republic seems to be descending into oligarchy. See Robert Michaels, what think you? So I'm not familiar with Robert Michaels. I'm not real sure who that is, or Robert Michel's, I don't know. You know, I think we've been probably living in an oligarchy-ish country for a very, very long time. I think the idea that this is something new is, it's probably getting a little bit worse, or I'd say a little bit more consolidated. But remember, we've been living in, this has been the history of the country. We've had, gas and oil tycoons, railroad tycoons, steel tycoons. Now we have the tech tycoons, right? It's just the same thing, a different era, a little bit of a different mechanism, but it's the same thing, right? We've seen this multiple times throughout our history, and I think it's problematic. Certainly, I think that the best antidote is free speech, local government, local governance. You know, an active citizenry, people who are involved in civic virtue, civic life. That's how I think you sort of combat this ever-arching, growing, sort of tyrannical government. I mean, that's really, in my mind, what happens with government. They consolidate power. They have a monopoly on power. They want to dictate to everybody how to live their lives. And in doing so, they're gobbling up more power. They're extending into more areas. And the corporations that will help them do that or help them get that power by donating to them, by making sure they get reelected, by supporting their PACs, by donating $400 million like Zuckerberg did to actually run elections and those things. They're all doing that to just supplement their own power. And so this is just a reality that we need to understand and live in. You know, there are going to be people who are consolidating power at every turn. The way that we combat that is by promoting more and more freedoms. We want more freedoms, not less. And so that requires all of us to be vigilant. It requires all of us to, have hard conversations, stand up for things, take a little bit of risk from time to time, do things that make us uncomfortable. As long as, we're being good people and we're doing things that are of value in serving our fellow mankind, but not just rolling over and acquiescing to whatever the people in charge tell you to do. I think that is a recipe for further encroachment of government, more deterioration of our freedoms, and worse lives just across the board. Thanks, Sharon. We have Hockey D, who says, if you can't with fair voting, can't win in a just court system, can't win with an American Congress, what's left? Don't say next time. Yeah, I mean, it's a Hockey D. It's a very, very pertinent question, and I share your frustration, believe me. I think that the only thing that we can do is try to improve the system at this point in time. I know that's not what you want to hear. I know it's not a satisfactory answer for many people, but my prescription has been to get involved locally. Run for a local town council, run for a local Senate house, a local legislative house, a representative house, something like that. I think it starts locally, and it starts with getting a little bit more plugged in with your community. And remember that politics is not life. it feels like that because the government is so enmeshed in every facet of everything that we do. Everywhere we turn, the government's doing something, taxing you for something, charging you for something, screwing something up, killing somebody, killing someone else, dropping an blowing something somewhere. And so it feels like everywhere we turn, it's the government and politics. But that's not life. I mean, most of our life should be about other things, about, building a family, building a business, doing good in your community, spiritual growth, mental growth, improving the lives of those around you and those people you care about. But unfortunately right now, it's sort of us versus the government. And I think the best way to sort of protect yourself and regain a lot of your individual liberties is to enforce those where you have some autonomy. And that's locally. That's in your local level. I'm in Arizona. Not much I can do about Washington, D.C., 3,000 miles away. But in Scottsdale, Arizona, I can get involved. I can do things. I can help other people. And so that's what I'm encouraging people to do who are feeling frustrated. There's a lot of value you can get from just looking local. All right. We have another one from Jennifer who says, no question. Just want to thank you and the crew that makes this channel possible. I look forward to the live streams every day. Thanks, Jennifer. I look forward to them too. I miss them. Today I was rusty because I missed you guys on Thursday and Friday last week. And then I came into the office and of course Windows had an update. So I was literally rebooting my computer like 10 minutes before the show. And then it had an update that it didn't tell me about. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's like, so everything breaks. And so it's like, I just can't leave anymore. Like no more vacations, no more holidays. So we're just going to grind through this week. I'll be here on the 31st and on the 1st. No more breaks. Thanks, Jennifer. Appreciate you being here. We have Crypto Jason who says, being in the field artillery in U.S. Army, those videos match a missile strike. Wow, interesting. Yeah, see, that's interesting. I read that elsewhere. I saw that somebody said that looked like a missile, but I don't know how that works, to be honest. I wasn't in field artillery or anything like that, so I'm not an expert in that category, but it seems to me like if you have a couple of buildings close up, it might be hard to weave a missile in between sort of the parallel walls there. We saw some of the video, right? So if something was coming from the sky, it would have to be sort of a very steep trajectory, like a 90-degree parallel to the street, coming in hot. But if somebody, had a bazooka or something like that, that's a whole different story. But the idea here that it was an RV that exploded, we saw a picture of an RV, we heard some of the sounds. I think that is somewhat plausible, but interesting point there. Crypto Jason, we have White Buffalo 84 who says, Rob, can we talk about the Washington State unemployment audit that is the California unemployment snafu? Well, we can talk about it. I can't talk about it because I don't know much about any of that stuff. Washington State unemployment audit that is the California unemployment snafu. I'll Google that, but I can't talk about that right now because I have not heard about it. I don't live in Washington State. And I don't live in California State either, fortunately. So we are, I'll take a look at that and then we'll see if I can remember to bring it up next time. Wolfgang Deo says, is there a case for pardoning Hunter Biden? LOL, first question of today, Saha. Sorry. I think he had undue influence from the big guy, whomever. Well, Donald Trump is certainly not going to pardon Hunter Biden. But once Joe gets in office, why wouldn't he? We have another one from Jenny Farmer who says, wondering how many senators and congressmen are needed to contest the election. Good question, Jenny. So Jenny, it's sort of not an easy question. So the way that it works is when the votes are counted on January 6th, when Mike Pence is literally opening them up and handing them to the tellers, they're going to come back. And as he's reading the votes, different people can contest or object to those votes. So in 2016 and 2017, on January 6th, Maxine Waters was one U.S. representative who said, I needed a senator to join me. So you need one person from each house. You need one senator and one House representative. If they combine and object to a state's votes, or electoral votes, then they have to break off. They have a debate. They decide by their each different houses on how to vote. So they'll have a floor vote. So the Senate will vote on that state's votes. The House will vote on that state's votes. Those votes, if they're uniformly objected to by both houses, those votes will not count. So you can answer that in a couple different ways. How many are needed to object to a vote? Well, you just need one senator and one House representative. In order to throw out those votes after they've debated objecting them, you need majorities in both houses. So you need 51 senators and you need whatever the majority is in the House in order to get those votes thrown out, which is why it's a tall order. We have Curtis Bartle who says, Can't wait to see Trump supporters January 6th in Washington, D.C. Yeah, the president has been really sort of promoting that. So we'll see what kind of turnout that has. Good luck over there, Curtis Bartle. Travel safely, be well. We have another one from Aaron Seavey who says, Rob, welcome back. How can law like endangerment be a law? Laws starts talking about the possibility of something happening. This is a dangerous road to go down. It is a dangerous road. Yeah. So he's asking about things like endangerment. How can that be a law, right? Endangerment would be this concept like we see endangerment charges sometimes around Arizona when somebody's doing something sort of kind of dangerous with a firearm, but nothing actually happened, right? So somebody's waving around a firearm. That's endangerment. Well, how is it endangerment? Nobody got shot. The gun didn't go off. They were just waving it around. Nobody was injured, right? Literally nothing happened. Somebody saw somebody waving a gun around. Nothing happened. Something could have happened for sure, but nothing did. Is that really endangerment? It's a good question. See this a lot with conspiracy type cases too. You know, a conspiracy, the rules around conspiracy. This is kind of a good example for you, Aaron. The rules around conspiracy, which I think we've talked about on this channel, with the case of the big Gretchen Whitmer out of Michigan. Remember the 6 individuals were in this conspiracy to go and kidnap her. Literally, we covered this story. And the question there was, well, was it really a conspiracy? Because there was sort of a lot of knuckleheads sitting around talking about, overthrowing the government and seizing control of power and all that stuff. But they were just kind of talking about it. So is that really a conspiracy? Well, if you read some of the conspiracy rules, it says that kind of just the locker room talk about it is, not so much. But when you do something that's an overt act in furtherance of that conspiracy, in this case, that talk, that body talk, that, braggadocio that we heard from those guys, when they actually got in their cars and started to scout out Big Gretchen Rona, when they were literally driving past her residence, that's an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy, because now they're talking about where to abduct her and like they're, taking pictures of her residence and stuff, literally, to try to abscond with her. That's an overt act in furtherance. And so the law will make some distinctions for certain categories of crimes like conspiracy, whereas for other crimes like endangerment, there's really not. And you're right, it can get a little bit murky, a little bit of a gray area, which is where you need a good lawyer to come in and walk you through it. So thanks for that, Aaron. Appreciate it. We have another one from Ron B, who says, well, the left media wants to back Trump in the corner. Well, let's not forget, it's not just one person being backed in the corner. It's 74 million patriots, from Ron B. And I agree with that. I mean, there's a lot of people who are just, they're just not accepting the narrative. And there's a lot of evidence that says that there's good reason not to. Just because that you don't see it on Washington Post or CNN or even YouTube now, doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And we've talked about a lot of it, a lot of concerning things across the board. And the worst thing that you can do to 74 million people, which is what we've been trying to help here, to help prevent this, is by telling them to sit down and shut up, and you don't get to talk about it. It's just going to anger them. I think it's going to make them a lot more active, and there's going to be a subset of 74 million people who think, okay, this is it. This is the end of America. It's time to do something drastic. I'm not encouraging that. I don't want that. I think violence is the worst possible thing that anybody can do to move forward a political cause. I totally disavow any violence or any forms of violence. Doesn't mean that it won't happen. Right. And that's what I think your point there is about, Ron B. The better way to do it is to talk about these ideas, explore them, come to some sort of synthesis, which is all we're trying to do here. Thanks, Ron. We have Tonka Tough, who says the military is giving vaccines in Detroit, Michigan. Do you think that has anything to do with martial law? No, I don't, Tonka. I haven't seen anything else about that, about military, about martial law or military sort of supplanting civilian law. But I did see a lot of information about the military acting as a transmission provider, sort of a supply chain management division of vaccine distribution. So they're going to be helping facilitate the distribution across the country, as they should, right? We've got military facilities all across the country. They've got a lot of capacity to move these things around, a lot of training protocols and so on. So I think that they're probably going to be very good at distributing it quickly. We have another one from Jamie Zaluff, who says, Rob, Biden may have free reign to do whatever the left wants, so why does it matter if half the country finds him illegitimate? It's a great question, Jamie. It's a great question, because I'm not real sure he's going to have much free reign for a certain period of time, right? So let's say, for example, he does get into office and the Republicans keep the Senate. If this January 5th election goes with the Republicans, then largely President Biden has 2 terms where he's ineffective, okay? Because Mitch McConnell is not going to pass anything that is going to be too liberal, too left, and he's basically a lame duck candidate from his first day in office, right? He's the president, yes. The House of Representatives has a very it's currently controlled by the Democrats, but by a much smaller margin than it was last year because the Republicans won a number of representative seats this last election. So now it's a very close margin. So if it's a far left policy, are they going to be able to pass it with overwhelming numbers? Probably not. But even if they did, let's say they pass something that's very left wing and that goes over to a Republican Senate, they're not going to approve that. So it needs to be somewhat moderate, which is kind of the benefit of having a split party. Now, if it does go in favor of the Democrats, then you also have to remember right now they have the 2 branches of government. So they have the executive branch and the legislative branch. They have the House and the Senate. And then in that situation, they would have a lot more leeway to pass whatever they want. Because they would pass the House, pass the Senate, the vice president would stamp it into law. If it's something that goes too far, you've got a conservative Supreme Court now, which could declare that law to be unconstitutional. Whether they do that or not is an entirely different issue altogether. Okay, we've seen John Roberts, the Chief Justice, be a little bit squishy when it comes to new administrations. We saw him really twist himself into a pretzel to give Barack Obama the Affordable Care Act, even though they had to reclassify that as a tax and all sorts of problems. But really a lot of deference to the executive branch of the government from the judicial branch. So if that happens and the judicial branch is deferential, you're right. It's certainly a concern, Jamie. Absolutely a concern. They can do whatever they want if the Supreme Court's not going to step in. If the Supreme Court does step in and they have the Senate and they have the House and the presidency and they just pack the court, they just add another 5 justices on there. You're right. I mean, it's kind of the end of the republic, right? They can just kind of pass whatever they want. No holds barred. One party rule across the entire nation. So, can be pretty bad. Conversely, let's say they do start passing some of this stuff and it really angers a lot of people. I think the overwhelming majority of Americans in 2 short years will flip the House of Representatives. So let's say, for example, the Senate goes to the Democrats. They win these Georgia runoffs. They win. They get 2 years of all blue control. Hopefully they don't pack the Supreme Court, but maybe they can get that done in 2 years. We don't know. If they do that, there's a red wave in 2022. Republicans take back the House by a large margin. Joe Biden has the last 2 years of his presidency that are, once again, sort of a lame duck presidency, not able to get much of anything done. And the more illegitimate the Biden administration appears, the less likely that some of the middle road people, the centrists, are going to support that administration and some of these policies. I think you're right, though. It may not matter, right? If half the country thinks he's illegitimate and they control all the levers of power, doesn't matter, which is why I think it's very important that the Senate does not go blue on January 5th, the runoff over in Georgia. But I don't live in Georgia. We'll see what they decide to do there. We have another one from Brian Coker who says, have any states done an actual election audit, not a recount, an audit? So I think the closest one at this point has been Georgia. A lot of criticisms about that, though. The closest thing that I've seen, well, that's not true. So we have Georgia. They were doing recounts, and there was some issues with the signature matching. So then they said that they were going to go back and do a Cobb County signature verification audit. They're going to match the signatures in Cobb County. Many people were throwing their arms up in the air and saying, well, nobody cares about Cobb County. What the heck happened out of Fulton County, which is where that Staples Center was, where the water main broke, the urinal overflowed, whatever happened. We saw the video of the suitcases coming out and so on. Audits are happening, recounts are happening, but there's a lot of questions about how they're being conducted, whether it's sort of a spot check. Like in Arizona, we had a spot check audit. So they pulled out 100 ballots. They checked those 100 ballots. They found a 3% swing in favor of Donald Trump. So then the judge expanded the audit to, I think, 1,000 ballots. They redid it and they found, okay, well, the margin was in fact much smaller. So the error rate dropped down significantly. So the judge ended the inquiry there. And they're appealing that. So there's been a lot of recounts and a lot of audits going on, but has any really satiated anybody or answered any questions? Not really. Good question, though. Thanks, Brian. We have another one from Sharon who says, one problem is that some of us believe in the rule of law while others think the end justifies the means. The laws are malleable or optional. Yeah, exactly right, Sharon. This is a pretty big distinction between sort of some of the judicial philosophies on the Supreme Court, right? You have the originalist judges who say the law is what the law says it is. The law, you read it, it says what it is. That's the end of the inquiry. We take the law, we apply the facts to the law. We say, okay, this is how this works. Here's the result. There's a different philosophy that Amy Coney Barrett referred to when she was during her Senate judiciary testimony, where she said there's a segment of the legal community who believes in active liberty as a philosophy, which means the law doesn't really matter a whole lot. The judge's role, the judiciary's role, is to encourage the most amount of liberty. It's to right the wrong. It's sort of like a court of equity where they're not deciding on the rule, they're deciding on fairness. They're not deciding on what the law says, they're deciding on what's most fair. Okay, so the analogy would be like if you were starving and you stole your neighbor's loaf of bread. Well, the law says that you can't steal a loaf of bread. It's his bread. Okay, you broke the law, you go to jail for the law. That's the original, sort of an originalist interpretation of that, which it was going to sound harsh, right? Well, he's hungry. Well, that's too bad. The law is what the law is. He should go get his own bread or ask his neighbor to give him some bread. Okay, it's a nice neighbor. The neighbor might just give him a half of the loaf. Okay, no problem. Don't steal it. There are alternatives to that. An active liberty type of interpretation would say, well, that's true, but if we put that guy in prison for stealing that loaf of bread, he's going to be harmed. He's going to be hurt. He was just hungry. He needed to eat something, and so we're not going to penalize him. In fact, we're not even going to, we're just going to give him half a loaf of the bread. That neighbor has too much bread anyways, and they can do without some of it, right? And so they're sort of balancing the equities there. And you can see in that example how you can say, well, it's kind of not a bad argument, right? Like, that person's going to die if he doesn't have bread. You can make a compelling argument to support that. But when you take that on a sort of a massive scale and you apply that and it trickles down, you really do lose the backbone of the law, because every single judge everywhere is just doing whatever the hell they want. They're just manipulating things and sort of encouraging this idea of active liberty. Like they're just going to help make people whole, when in my mind, that's not what the judiciary is for. Okay, the legislature writes the rules, executive enforces the rules, the judiciary interprets the rules. They don't recreate the rules, they just interpret them. And they tell you what the rules are based on what the legislature said. So they don't get to just go in and write new legislation, to just change new things, because that's not their role. That's what the legislature has to do. They're the body that is most accountable to the people. The people elect them, not the judges. So we entrust our legislature to make those decisions, not the judiciary. Another one from Isaac, who says, Pelosi, Mitch, and the like need to be primaried. This is so making the case for term limits. I know. I'd be okay with that across the board. Term limits across the board. I'm so tired of these people who've been in office for 40 years. How long was Biden in office? 37 years? 37 years. Just doing what? Doing Lord knows what. Just working your way up that chain. Selling access, doing everything you can to secure your political legacy. I'd be okay booting them out after 2 terms. We have Steve Allwest, who says, I heard it was not the Dominion voting machines were in the building, but that the data from the voting machine. Also hear that Adam Shifty asked for the data from the building before it blew up. Now, so that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, the data in there would be very interesting. Do you need to blow up the building to delete the data? Probably not, right? We just saw the SolarWinds Orion hack, which basically had access to the entire country. That story just went away. Gone with the wind. One of the biggest hacks in the history of the world. Gone. No more information about it. Like it never happened. Not a big deal, I suppose. But, you could just use one of those little worms and just walk right in and delete the data, probably without ever even having physical access to it. So I'm not sure that you would need to blow it up in order to accomplish that. But who knows? We have another one from Zulu, who says, I've been gone for 4 days. He says, hi, Faith. Hi, Faith. Zulu. Hi, Faith. He says, do you think Trump will be kind enough to pass along to Biden some portion of his extensive expertise with uniting people? Do you think Trump will be kind enough to pass along to Biden some portion of his extensive expertise with uniting people? Well, Zulu, Trump is the author of The Art of the Deal. So what I'm thinking he should do is just leave a signed copy of that right on the Oval Office Resolute desk for Joe Biden. Say, here you go, Joe. Boom, right here. Here's how to run the country. We have another one from Philip Blake, who says the AT&T building, the Batman building in Nashville, is designed to survive an explosion. Interesting. Yeah, so the Batman building. Is Bruce Wayne in there? Going to have to look that one up. So I think some of this is interesting because the Batman building, or the these mega centers, these hubs that have a lot of communications data, they're pretty hardened, right? The United States has these nodes, these sort of backbones, these access points to the internet in a number of different states. We saw a lot of this come to light when Edward Snowden, in fact, was releasing or detailing how some of this stuff worked. Essentially, the U.S. government would sort of jack in, like they were jacking into the matrix, at some of these main central nodes, and anything that passed through those nodes was getting gobbled up by the federal government. So everything. So rather than going into your home and hooking into your little cable modem, they just went to the main hub that connects to everybody's cable modem, and they just said, okay, well, we're just going to siphon off the information right here. And so there are a lot of these facilities throughout the United States, and they need to be hardened. They need to be secured. They need to be bomb-proof and bulletproof and very, very hardened, because as we see here, when they are disrupted, 911 systems go down, the FAA cleared the flight thing, cell phones were out for a long period of time in Nashville, and so on. It's a pretty big problem. So just the fact that it's something that's hardened, in my mind, doesn't make it suspicious on its own. The fact that somebody drove up an RV in front of the building, told everybody to leave, and then exploded it, that is a curious little bit of information right there. Moving on, we've got one from Levi's Trading Post, who says, Levi's, defensive Pence logic seems to be he could only do this move decision once, assuming a 2-term limit. Seems to me he could do it. Okay, so I see what you're saying. So he's asking if, Vice President Mike Pence would not be able to do that at the end of a second term, right? Which would have been what Joe Biden did, because he was at the end of Barack Obama's second term. So he couldn't declare himself the president, or he couldn't declare Barack Obama the president, or I guess Joe Biden couldn't have declared Hillary Clinton the president. Is that your point, Levi's Trading Post? Because I think he still could have. If we're going to say that this Pence rule is in effect, like whoever the president of the Senate is just gets to pick the next president, then I think that they could just pick whoever they want, right? Whoever's running there at that point in time. So I don't think that the two-term limit prescribes the vice president's options. We have Wolfgang Deo, who says some news had said he had an explosive permit until 1998 or something, so he had access one time, and crime fighting was said and rubbed me wrong. Okay, so I see what you're saying. So an explosive permit. I understand. I thought you were being facetious there, Wolfgang Deo. I thought you were sort of hinting, maybe the government allowed him to go do that, which they didn't. You can, of course, get explosive permits for things like, TNT and doing demolition and all sorts of stuff, but I thought he was an IT specialist, so I wasn't real sure why he would get that type of access. Another one from Cheryl Myers, who said the 12th Amendment was enacted before state statutes were passed, declaring all state delegates would go to the popular vote winner, right? So I'm not exactly sure on the date that the 12th Amendment was passed, but it's the 12th, so it's old. It's one of the earliest, and yeah, I'm sure that's probably right. That many of the states followed suit and made it a popular vote. Okay, remember that the idea here that we have a democratically elected president is sort of a nicety of our law. Okay, we don't necessarily have to vote for the president. The legislature could just say, we're not going to let the people vote. We're just going to leave it up to the electoral college. The legislature themselves could vote on their own. They could do whatever they want with it. That all happened, I would presume, after the 12th Amendment. But, the dates are, I'm not exactly sure on the dates, Cheryl Myers, or the date of every other state, but I understand your point. You're saying that the 12th Amendment was in effect and it passed, it was written for a certain situation, for a certain context. And the states came along after the fact and changed the rules. And so the 12th Amendment should be even more powerful. It should supersede them even more, because what the states did was out of a comportment, out of alignment with the 12th Amendment, which is really the same argument that Rep. Gohmert is making in his lawsuit. Thanks, Cheryl. We have another one from Wolfgang, who says, people keep calling America an experiment of democracy. Athens was. It is not. It is a democracy republic. It is the structure of our governance. Yeah, it's a democratic republic. So we have a lot of democratic ideals in there, but we're a republic. We elect other people to go and do our governance for us. I would say more 2021 example of a democracy would be, we all vote on our cell phone for every single bill. Okay, we have an app, like a Tinder app. You just say, that bill, ugly. That bill, ugly. That bill, way, way, way not good enough. Next. Okay, I have a lot of other adjectives for my swipes that I could be using right now, but they're not very family friendly. And I don't even use Tinder anyways. Try to find me on there. Maybe you will. I probably have an old profile on there. Don't try to find me on there. All right, we have Lorinda Osuna, who says, thank you for your explanations and encouragement. Thanks, Lorinda. I appreciate it. We have Miguel Henriquez, who says, if a congressman, senator were to object to a state's electoral votes, would it take a majority House Senate vote to throw out those electoral votes? Yes. So that's my understanding of it. It's my understanding of the rules. Okay, this has not happened in a very, very long time. It really, if ever, I think. In 1876, or whenever that election was, they sort of formed another committee, another delegation that then decided those issues. So I could be wrong on this, but my understanding is, yes, it takes one from each party, one from each house, not from each party, one from each house, one representative, one senator. They join, object. They go into their individual houses, debate. They vote on a floor vote from each house whether or not to throw those states' votes out. They can do that a number of times for every objection. And then if one presidential candidate, if nobody gets to 270, that's what triggers the contingent election. We have AL, who says, what do you think of pairing ranked voting with contracts tying officials to the positions they claim when running? Sick of being lied to, then waiting 8 years. Okay, so I see what you're saying. Interesting question. So with contracts, tying officials to the positions they claim when running. Interesting. Okay. So I see what you're saying. So what AL is saying here is, let's say that there are three people who are running for office, and we have person A, B, and C. And we have, they all sign a contract with what they're going to do. A says, I'm going to reduce taxes. B says, I'm going to increase taxes. C says, taxes are going to stay the same. Okay, so we all want to reduce taxes. So we want to pick A first, who's going to reduce taxes. We want C, who's not going to change taxes. And then we want B, who is going to be the person who's raising taxes last. So we want to go with A, C, and B. Following? With ranked voting, we would say, okay, we're going to give it to A. Nobody wants taxes. I could riff about taxes for about 24 hours. Not going to do it. We want A in office. A signs a contract to reduce taxes. A gets into office, violates the law, or doesn't fulfill their end of the bargain, breaks the contract. With ranked choice voting, because my understanding is this is your question, AL. A violates their contract, they're out of office. Next one up is B, because B is our second choice. B also signed a contract, they slot into the position. If B also can't keep that in mind, they're out too. We bring in C in. So it'd be an interesting idea. I don't know how we would integrate that into our current political system, but hey, I'm okay with throwing non-performing, lying congresspeople right out the door as quickly as possible. Whatever that looks like, I'm open to a discussion about it. We have S. Balzer, who says, can the same rep and senator object to multiple states' electoral votes? I think they can. So I have not seen anything that says that they cannot. You don't get 1, 2, 3. You don't get like in criminal law, we get a certain number of strikes. Okay, we get when we're talking about a jury, right? We're picking a jury. We get a cop who's on the jury, or somebody who's married to a cop on the jury who says that everybody who enters into a courtroom is guilty. Boom, we strike that juror. You're gone. You're out of here. Don't even have to explain why. We get 2 of those. That's it. Or I think we get, yeah. So then you can challenge a number of them for cause. So you can challenge them for cause. You can say, okay, well, these other jurors, this guy said this, he can't be fair. This guy said he doesn't like, the color of our defendant's skin. This guy said this. So those are all struck for cause, but we get peremptory strikes, which means we can just do whatever we want with those strikes. And to my knowledge thus far in reading the rules, I've not seen anything that limits what our congresspeople can do in that regard. All right, a couple others. We've got Fiona Fairchild, who says, people in the media say that the Nashville bombing isn't terrorism because there was a warning and the day and time. What is terrorism? Does it need to be corporal harm and not mayhem? Yeah, so it's interesting. I'm not real sure how that language was being worded. I saw some of it where they were saying it's, I'm not sure if they're saying it's not terrorism because it was an explosion in the middle of a public place that scared the hell out of a lot of people, terrorized a lot of business owners. So in that idea, I would clearly say it's clearly terrorism, right? Like, clearly. I think the way that I read it was a very artful manipulation of language. It was saying this has some dissimilarities from terrorism, or this has some things that don't resemble terrorism, or this is not as terroristic as some other terroristic things. That's kind of how I've been seeing it framed. And I think you can make a good argument for that too, right? Yeah. I mean, most terrorist bombings don't warn people to leave. Give them a big warning, tell them, get out of here. It doesn't happen often, right? If ever. So it is a little bit abnormal, not sort of the run-of-the-mill terrorism, which is interesting. But is it terrorizing? I would say absolutely, especially if you're a business owner and you go to work that next day and your business is gone. It's pretty terrorizing. We have Wolfgang Deo, who says, the thing is, when the process declares a president, the right will let it go. They may grumble, although we know now is the time to act and cue. But what if Trump is framing Biden? Yeah, gosh, I've seen a lot of that lately. I've seen a lot of this, you should, trust Trump type of talk. Like, everything that goes poorly for Trump is because it's part of his master plan. I think we're going down a little bit of a crazy hole on some of that stuff. There's only so much twisting and manipulating you can do before it's just bad news. It's just not good. It's not looking good. The Q thing is very, very interesting. On that Q thing, what I noticed? If you go back and you look at the U.S. attorney who's in charge, his name was something, his middle name is Q. Okay, something, Q, something, whatever it is. If you look up the bomber, his middle name is Q. It's Quinn. Anthony Quinn Warner was being investigated by the U.S. attorney, somebody, Q, somebody. And I saw that and I was like, that's weird. There are two Q names, which are a random name. I mean, how many Q names can you think of, right? One's Quinn, one's, I don't know. I can't even think of another one off the top of my head. They're both Qs. And so I'm like, oh, okay, so this will be fun. Maybe the QAnons will start latching onto this. But then, of course, it's just confirmation bias, right? I don't believe in that stuff. I just think that it's funny. And when you start looking at the letter Q, you kind of see it everywhere, right? And now I'm thinking, this is a clear case of confirmation bias. I'm just seeing random Qs in these explosion stories. It's a little bit weird. But it doesn't mean anything. All right, we've got Claire DeLuna, who says, what do you think about Wisconsin dismissing the case based that, I think it was, that Trump was a candidate and not a state, but Texas was dismissed for the opposite reasoning? I think that is what Barnes said. So, Claire, it's really hard to give a sound, rational basis for a lot of what these courts are doing, at least in a general sense. Many courts are finding all sorts of reasons to throw out Trump's claims. He had claims that were thrown out before the election because they were not ripe yet. No harm had happened yet, therefore it's not ripe. You can't bring a claim if there's no harm yet. Ripeness thrown out. They bring a claim after the election. Well, you brought it too late. You should have brought this sooner. Boom, lawsuit dismissed, latches. One state sues another state. No standing. States don't have the ability to do that, even though the Supreme Court has original jurisdictions in state versus state lawsuits. That's detailed in the Constitution. Boom, dismissed. No standing. Same with Trump. We've seen electors file lawsuits. We've seen representatives file lawsuits. We've seen individual taxpaying citizens file lawsuits. We've seen President Donald Trump himself file lawsuits. We've seen the campaign file lawsuits. all just dismissed for whatever basis that they want. And that's kind of the point. I think what Robert Barnes largely is talking about is sort of the convolution of any of these standing doctrines. I've heard him speak a lot about standing being such a problematic doctrine in legal jurisprudence because of those issues. The courts can essentially do whatever they want. They can just sort of pick out. So when you talk about lawsuits, there's this whole sort of body of law that's about even getting the case in front of a court. Before the lawsuit's even filed, you have to think about those things. Who is suing whom? Why are they suing? What's the relief? Are they in the right courtroom? Are they in the right forum? Are they in the right jurisdiction? Can the court that they're trying to sue in, do they have the power to even grant the relief that they're seeking? This is before you even talk about the claim. We're not even talking about, X punched Y. We're just saying, okay, how do we get the lawsuit in court before we start alleging the facts that this happened on December 1st and at this location, and this person is this name and this person is that name? It's all sort of preliminary issues. And I think what Robert Barnes is really diving into is that those issues are so subjective. You can just come up with one for any reason, anytime in the world, for whatever you want. And that is not a good way to run a legal system, because you're giving the judges too much autonomy, too much discretion. They can basically find any basis that they want to do anything that they want, which is adverse to the interest of justice. Okay, we have not seen one of these election lawsuits go the full distance yet. It's been 2 months. We've seen just slivers of actual evidence in the court of law. Largely, the courts have just been dumping them out on those preliminary issues. We have Sumo Wow, who says, Giuliani says we have a chance, but with SCOTUS and the states blocking Trump's every move, do you think they're just trying to stall until inauguration? Yeah, it's a waiting game at this point in time. I don't think that you're going to see much activity from the Supreme Court. Donald Trump filed a new lawsuit in front of the Supreme Court. They demanded that their response was due. So Trump filed the suit. The Democrats are going to respond. They have, I think, until after the inauguration to respond. So the Supreme Court is not expediting their motion. I didn't check the docket today, but as of last week, they haven't expedited anything. And that takes place after the inauguration. So the Supreme Court is open to hearing it. But by that point in time, if Biden's sitting in the White House with the new curtains hung, what are they going to do about it? We have another one from Sharon who says, we are looking at one-party rule permanently. They can rig any election from here on out if this election isn't fixed. Yeah, I mean, it's a very real possibility. And if you get into a situation where the Democrats take the House, they already have it. If they win the Senate in this January 5th runoff out of Georgia, that's the Congress. That's the legislative branch entirely. They'll have the executive branch. They'll have the ability to just pack the court. They could even take the judiciary branch. You may be living in a one-party Democratic ruled America. Ugh. Shivers. Curtis Bartle says, far green street light behind the RV, like something went in front of it or was changing to yellow. Take a look if you get a chance. Good show. Yeah, I will, Curtis. I'll look at that. What's cool about the internet is that probably by about today, once enough people have been sort of dissecting and analyzing those video clips, we'll probably get some pretty good angles and some good compilations about what happened there. We have Greg David says, what do you think would exactly happen under martial law? I think all he would do is seize the voting machines. Am I wrong? Well, that's part of the problem, Greg, is, you don't know. I really don't know what that would look like. I think that it would be troubling because the first things that you sort of see go would be like what we saw during the Civil War era, right? Which is sort of the ability, the elimination of habeas corpus, right? They can sort of detain you for whatever reason you want because you're part of a military tribunal now. Now you're part of, the military. They can just hang on to you. So your right to a fair trial, your right to self-defense, your right to cross-examine, a speedy trial, a lot of those protections that you see in the Bill of Rights were put in place because of a reaction to essentially what was martial law in the colonies. Right? The Bill of Rights they were very upset about quartering. The English troops were literally saying we could just go kind of shack up wherever we wanted. We're going to come quarter in your residence. We're the military. We need this house. We need this livestock. We need this farm. It's ours, right? And we're going to take it. So they said, no, right? You're free from unreasonable searches and seizures. You don't have to acquiesce to this totalitarian style of power. So if Donald Trump says, yeah, I'm just going to institute martial law just to go in and seize those voting machines, and I'm just going to suspend your right to private property, I'm going to suspend your right to due process, right? Right now, there's a legal process in place to go take those machines. Dominion is fighting them, or I don't know if they're fighting them actually, but a lot of these other states are fighting them. So individual states, like in Arizona, they wanted to go seize those things. The president of the Senate sent over some subpoenas to the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors. They didn't do anything with those subpoenas. So now they're filing those in our Superior Court to see what the courts are going to do with them. But that's due process. They want access to the machines. The courts say, well, you got to go through the process in order to get them. That's okay. Okay, I know it's frustrating in this particular issue because you want the machines, you want them seized, you want to see what happens. But that's a good thing that they have to go through that process in order to go take somebody else's property. Because if that precedent is established, if we say, okay, Donald Trump can just go in and seize the voting machines, what happens when the next person is in power and they want to go seize other things? They want to go seize your gas-powered car because you're ruining the planet. Something like that, which probably sounds absurd right now, but may not be. Okay, 10 years from now, there may be or COVID. Okay. They're going to come in and they're going to tell you what you can do. They're going to take away your ability to leave your residence because the military said it's necessary. That line starts to shift a little bit. It makes me very uncomfortable. So I don't like the idea that even though Donald Trump may just go seize the voting machines, the next person in power can use that as a precedent to go take the voting machines and then do a little bit more. And the next person, a little bit more. And then before you know it, what do we need a Congress for? They're slow. They suck. They don't do anything, right? Most of America hates Congress. So now you bring in this new shiny object that says we're going to actually get things done, and it's going to be good for you, America, and it might be good for a little while, and it's really, really good until it's not. So that's why I just can't support martial law under any circumstances. We have S. Love who says, involve locally, corrupt elections, don't have hope for change there. As a Cuban American, we are in a bad place. You just laid out how we die. We don't stand up. It's gone. I support a national strike on January 6th. That's from S. Love. And so I think those types of causes are important. Speak up. Get involved politically. There you go. One more time. You just laid out how we die. We don't stand up and it's gone. I support a national strike on January 6th. So if you're like S. Love and you support that, get in touch. We have Curtis Bartle who says Microsoft engineer discovers smart thermostat in the Georgia tabulation room reporting votes to China. What? So a Nest was reporting votes to China? That's an interesting claim. I'm gonna look into that one because I'd be curious what that says. Thanks, Curtis. We have another one coming in from Aaron. Rob, this election BS reminds me of the OJ trial, and it's the Dem stating if the gloves don't fit, you're right. It pays to have a great defense attorney. Yep, it does. It does. Yeah, people think that lawyers are expensive. Think about how expensive it is if you have no lawyer or a bad lawyer. Can be a lot more expensive. We have another one from Wolfgang says, oh yeah, military is already involved plausibly per the executive order 2018, the acting DOD secretary and subsequent orders. Yeah, I'm fine with that involvement. So yeah, that's right. There is that executive order that Donald Trump passed in 2018 that was supposed to be reported on. So in 2018, he wrote an executive order that mandates that all of the government agencies that are responsible for sort of our national security, all of those agencies, DOJ, CISA, we have the FBI, Homeland Security, Department of Treasury, all of them. They're mandated to write a report on election interference by foreign adversaries. And they're supposed to have that report due, I think by December 18th. Yeah, 2 weeks ago. And they didn't have it done. Oh, still sorting some things out. Maybe we'll get it next year. Maybe we won't. We have Ann Woodson who says, thank you for your detailed info. Helps average folks understand. It is clear there is something fishy in Denmark, which I think is a Shakespeare quote. It says, why are we being thwarted at every turn by people who are supposed to be working for we the people? Well, Annie Woodson, I think it's just because they're politicians and they're not really working for you and me, you and I. They're working for themselves. They're working for their own political power, as most people are working for themselves or working for their own self-interest. Just because they get elected and they say a bunch of flowery things on the campaign trail doesn't really mean that they care that much about you. I know it hurts. It stings to think that way. How? What? They don't? Yeah, they don't. They have their own ambitions in mind. They have got a lot of things that they need to navigate in order to make money and get elected again and secure, a loan for that, or help a friend do this, or whatever it is. That's kind of how the system is designed almost. So I think we're right to be skeptical. We're right to demand accountability and transparency. The more that we delegate that stuff to the government, the more that we abdicate our own responsibility to hold them accountable, literally hold them accountable every turn. Ask them the hard questions. Don't support them. Speak out against the ones who are doing the bad things. Speak in favor of the ones who are doing the good things. Donate to the good candidates. Get involved in the people who you think have integrity. Okay, just because all of the people that we see in office right now have no integrity, largely, doesn't mean that anybody who's running also lacks integrity, right? You want to find the people who are sort of, I kind of sense sort of a new wave of political activism in this next decade that is really going to be a response to some of the overreach, right? The pendulum swings both ways. Right now, we just have massive government everywhere you turn. Donald Trump's government was not particularly small, okay? Huge spender, spent a ton of money, didn't really do much to shrink the size or the scope of the federal government, did some good things in terms of reducing taxes and cutting a lot of the regulations, stuff that I do support. It's still a big behemoth of a government, right? It has not been cut down to size. So the pendulum is still way over here in big government territory. Republicans, big government. They voted for $2.4 trillion just as hard as the Democrats did. The Democrats probably would have taken double that. But the Republicans aren't any better, right? They're still expanding this thing at a behemoth scale, doing things that we can't afford, sending money all around the world. It's a problem. But the pendulum's over here, and I think it's going to swing back the other way. People are going to get tired of this stuff. And I think COVID is a lot to largely is awakening people to the insanity of overarching government. I mean, take a look at what's happening in California. I read a headline the other day, or I read an article that said that it analyzed the 20 biggest growing cities in the country, or at least where new residences were being built, where new apartment buildings were being built. Where is the economic activity in the country? All 20 of those cities were in places outside of California, right? Everybody's leaving California. Elon left. Ben Shapiro left. We had Joe Rogan leave. They're leaving in droves. I know that because they're coming to Arizona. Our housing prices are going through the roof. People are leaving. They're going from bad government to less bad government. And we're going to see what happens and how people respond in the next decade. But I hope it involves more political involvement, more, back to basics. What made this country great? Was it the fact that our government solved every single problem that any of us ever had ever? Or was it the fact that more people had more freedom, more autonomy, more personal responsibility, more charity, more love, more local governance? I think those were more important. That is the better recipe. We have a couple more, then we'll wrap up. We got Wolfgang Deo, who says, artillery shells use explosives like the alleged RV. It could be a missile, RV of death, C4, angry Play-Doh, special effects, mass delusion. Could be anything. Wolfgang is giving us a couple of ideas there. A few more. We have Vegas Smooch, who says here, democracy has a literal meaning. Rule by the majority. Free elections does not equal democracy. Free elections is free elections. Minority ruling is in a democracy is an oxymoron. Founding fathers had disdain for democracy. And yeah, I share a lot of the same criticisms with democracy, right? I've talked about this here, that if you have a majority, you can have, tyranny of the majority. The majority, I think Alexander de Tocqueville talks about this concept of tyranny of the majority, where they can just, sort of get in power and rule themselves at the expense of the minority. And so the founders didn't want that to happen, right? We didn't want mob rule. We see it in the Gladiator movie. The mob is fickle. They are fickle. They don't really know much. Okay, look at the man on the streets interviews from Jay Leno or Dave Letterman or any one of those guys. Okay, most people don't know anything about self-governance. Even the people that I talk to in my social life, they vote for one candidate or another candidate, and they can't articulate anything, almost anything about them. That is a problem. That is a concern. I think that is what the power structure ultimately wants, because you're a lot more malleable if you don't know anything. If all you know about Donald Trump is that he's a racist and he's a bigot and he grabbed women by the whatever, sounds like a pretty bad dude. And if you're an uninformed, uneducated voter, and that's what you know, you're a pretty valuable asset. There's a strong interest to keep you in that capacity. And so what we want is more people to know about some of this stuff. And I mean, actually know, think about it, reason through it, not look at a headline on CNN and just gobble that up and take somebody else's opinion, just copy their opinion, paste it right into your brain, and then regurgitate that everywhere you turn. That is not what we're talking about. We're talking about what the founding fathers did, what people who are involved in self-governance do. They discuss these issues, they debate them, they rationalize through them, they learn, they educate themselves. These are not new issues in America, but they're new issues for many Americans because they just haven't thought much about them. I think as the pendulum swings the other way, I'm hopeful that more and more people will get plugged in. They'll start shows like we're doing here, trying to analyze, add a little bit of extra value to their area of expertise, and we'll all be a little bit better off for it. And our last one of the day is from Wolfgang Deo, who says, brandishing a firearm takes just a negligent discharge to go from endangered to harmed. As for conspiracy talk, that would be probable cause. So he's responding back to my response to his first question. Thanks, Wolfgang. And I understand your point. Brandishing a firearm, yeah, it is dangerous. And the reason why it's a crime is because it can easily go from being something that's just reckless into something that kills somebody. So the law has carved out a little bit of an exception to some of the other actual activities that we want to criminalize, and probably for good reason. And that's it, my friends. That was a long show, about 2.5 hours. I'm so grateful that you were here. If you were here with us this entire time, I'm even more grateful because, my goodness, what a way to come back. It's been a long time off, and I'm really glad that we got to squeeze a lot in today. A couple things before we sign off for the evening. I want to invite you to subscribe. If you're not a regular of this program, we do go live at this time every day of the week. We want you to be here and be a part of that. So a subscribe would be very, very much appreciated. Helps keep the energy on the channel pretty good. A like, a comment, a share, inviting a friend or a family member to come join us during the live show would be great, right? Because we want more people to be involved in the conversation, and I'd be very, very appreciative of that. As another reminder, I am going to put the slides in the Discord. Actually, Miss Faith is. She's right back there in that office. She's going to take a copy of the slides, throw all of those in the Discord server. You can find the link in the description wherever you're watching this video. You can also get a copy of my book. The PDF is free. It's available in our Discord server. You can just click on the announcements channel in there and you'll see it. It's this book right here. It's called Beginning to Winning: How to Fight Your Case and Succeed in the Criminal Justice System. I wrote this year, and it's got a lot of information. It's really for people who've been charged with a crime or who are interested in the criminal justice system. It's got 9 steps that I walk you through, sort of an easy way to dissect a huge monumental problem that is the criminal justice system. It says, hey, look, these are the 9 things you got to think about. If you do these 9 things, you'll be more likely to succeed in your case. Also has a little bit about me, about what how I think and why I got into this area of law, why I do what I do. So if you want to check that out, it's free. Right in our Discord server. If you want to get a copy on Amazon, it's available there as well. I would love a review if you found it to be helpful or useful. And lastly, but not leastly, if you know anybody in the state of Arizona who has been charged with a crime, that's really what we do. That's my day job. We run a law firm here called the R&R Law Group. We've got an awesome team of people, a number of very, very good attorneys. We're excellent at what we do, and our passion is to help good people navigate through the criminal justice system so they can find safety, clarity, and hope in their lives and for their futures, and we're very good at it. So if you know anybody who has been charged with a crime, we'll take good care of them. We'd be very humbled if you would trust us enough to send a referral our way. We offer free case evaluations. We love to help people. We're very passionate about it, and so we'd be very appreciative of that. Aside from that, my friends, that's it. We're back. We're ready to get this week rocking and rolling. We're so grateful that you're here. I would encourage you to see us back here tomorrow, same time, same place. It's going to be 5 p.m. Arizona time, which is Mountain. It's going to be 4 p.m. over in California on the West Coast. We're going to be at 6 p.m. in Texas, Central Standard Time. And then on the East Coast, it's 7 p.m. We'll be right back here, same place, same time. Looking very forward to seeing you then. Everybody have a wonderful evening. Sleep well. Until next time, bye-bye.